you don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look up better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper than again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 14th part of What If Deku Finds Ben's Watch Ultimatrix. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of the incredible Muffin on fanfictionnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Ben ran as fast as he could and tried not to flinch every time there was an explosion. The latter was getting easier simply because there had been so many and he was getting used to them. The former was getting harder because he couldn't afford to jostle the body he was carrying. "Come on, Julie," he muttered. "We're almost there. We can make it." Amazingly, Julie was still conscious enough to make a noise of agreement. On her shoulder, Ship whined and nuzzled closer to her. The two were badly injured, but Ben kept telling himself that they would both make it, as long as they got help soon. Gwen hissed at him and waved him over. "Kevin's got the ship ready to go." "Thanks." Ben gently placed Julie on a platform of pink mana that Gwen created. He frowned when he saw the odd cracks in his cousin's skin. "How are you holding up?" Gwen smiled, but Ben knew her well enough to recognize when she was faking. "I'm okay, Ben. It's just it's been a pretty bad day." That was the biggest understatement of Ben's life. He couldn't remember any other time when things had gone from perfectly normal to apocalyptic in such a short amount of time. He tried not to think about how many people were already dead, including his parents, Gwen's parents, and their grandfather. It had happened so fast that they'd barely had time to cry. But it was going to be okay. He was Ben Tennyson. He could fix this. He didn't know how, but he would make it better. "Hey, Tennyson." Kevin stuck his head out the door of the Rust Bucket 3. "Get your girlfriend inside and strap in. We've got those things coming in hot." "How long before we can get off the planet?" Gwen asked. Kevin scowled. "I don't know if we can. Sensors are showing M in the atmosphere, and I'm picking up interplanetary chatter that they're showing up all over the galaxy." Ben tried not to wince. "How bad is it?" "Looks like they hit Earth first," but Kevin sighed. "It's bad. Worse than the hybrid, and it's only been a day. And it is only going to get worse." The three conscious humans jumped when Professor Paradox stepped out of the shadows. "Hello, all." Professor then grinned. "Man, am I glad to see you. This is the part where you tell us how to fix things, right?" Paradox smiled. "Indeed, I've come for that very purpose. Or, rather, I've come to collect those people who can fix this." Ben rolled his eyes. "Yeah, it's always gotta be me." Kevin laughed. "It's the end of the world, and he's still got an ego the size of a planet." "Actually, Ben is the only one I'm not here for," Paradox admitted. "It is Gwen, Kevin, and Miss Yamamoto that I require." Ben blinked. "Oh, okay. I guess they deserve a chance to save the universe, right?" "Of course." Paradox looked out into the distance, and his smile faded. "I require a moment to get them all to safety, Ben. My powers are being affected by this catastrophe, and I need focus. I will need you to buy me that time." Ben looked into the impossibly ancient man's eyes and saw the truth. "No, you don't. You just want me to feel good before the end, don't you?" Paradox smiled again, but it was sad. "You've always been good at reading me, my friend, no matter what timeline I visit." "It is true. I cannot take you with us." Gwen looked between Paradox and her cousin. "What? No, I've already lost everyone else. Don't leave Ben behind." Then pulled her in for a hug. "Gwen, it's okay. This is Paradox, remember. He always has a reason for things. I'll see you when you've saved the universe, okay? Be Ben." Julie struggled to sit upright and reached for him. "Ben, please." "It's okay, Julie." Ben took her hand and leaned in for a brief kiss. "I love you." Even that much effort was too much, and Julie collapsed again, tears mixing with the blood dripping down her face. Ben gently stroked her cheek and looked up at Kevin. "Take care of them, Levin." Kevin blinked furiously, trying not to let his own tears escape. "With my life, Tennyson. Don't go that far. I still need someone to mess with, and Gwen scares me." Then gave his cousin one last hug. "Get Julie and Ship on board, okay?" Gwen nodded and pulled the makeshift stretcher up the ramp of the ship. Paradox snapped his fingers, and the ship vanished. However, he remained behind. "Tell me the truth, Paradox," Ben said, oddly calm in the face of death. "How bad is it?" "About as bad as it gets," Paradox replied. "We have one chance to make things right. If we fail, everything will cease to exist save for him." Ben saw who Paradox was talking about, stepping through the ruins of his hometown. Yeah, that figures. I might as well go down swinging. I am sure you will give a good account of yourself, Paradox said, and patted Ben's shoulder. Good luck, my friend. Then Paradox was gone, leaving Ben to face his enemy, with nothing but the fire and the dead for company. All right, let's do this. Ben raised his hand over the dial of his watch. It's hero time. Midoriya smiled as he read over his feedback. He'd done well on his last quiz, not perfect, but still enough to maintain his spot as third best student in his class. He wanted to do better, but Bakugou stubbornly maintained his near-perfect grades. And Yaoyorozu, well, nobody was going to do better than Yaoyorozu. A gust of wind passed through, and it made him shiver. Autumn was coming in full force, and everyone was back to wearing their heavier school jackets. The girls had also begun wearing the optional stockings for their uniforms, though Uraraka had looked smugly at her female friends, because she'd been wearing them since school began. It wasn't just school uniforms that were being changed for the colder months. Aizawa had encouraged them all to make modifications to their costumes. It was just common sense that heroes couldn't afford to get sick because of their fashion sense. Fortunately, most of those modifications were minor, and the support department were supposed to have them ready today. Everyone, it's time for heroics. Yaoyorozu called out from inside the dorms. Line up outside and head for the lockers. The students scrambled to put away their things and got ready. Midoriya shared a quick smile with Uraraka, then moved to the front of the line. He led the boys to their locker room, while Yaoyorozu led the girls. You know, it kinda sucks that my quirk is all about taking hits, Kirishima said. I mean, my costume is always gonna get shredded. Maybe you should ask the support department to make you an outfit like Momo's, Zero offered. It repairs itself and can be programmed for different weather. Kirishima shrugged. Maybe. I'm not good with that computer stuff, and I might destroy it myself whenever I push my quirk. I think I'll just man up and deal with the cold. Midoriya hummed noncommittally as he put on his new hoodie. It had the same style as his redesign, but it was made of thicker materials. His gloves were also no longer fingerless, and his pants had outer padding, similar to armor plates, to help keep out the cold. Zero had actually gone for a complete redesign for the material in his costume, as had quite a few other students. Other than his helmet, gloves, and boots, his costume was made of the same material as Yaoyorozu's and Asui's. Ida had done the same with the black bodysuit underneath his armor. The nanotech had started to become very popular among the up-and-coming heroes with more skin-tight costumes, and had even started to spread out to pros who were tired of replacing their costumes every few weeks. Not everyone was hopping on the nanotech bandwagon. Bakugou, for instance, could have gone with that option for his shirt, but whether it was sheer stubbornness, or because the material was associated with Midoriya's friends, he declined. Ugh, Shoto, couldn't you have done something with your outfit? Ashido complained as the boys and girls met up. It's kind of plain. Todoroki shrugged. It's not like cold or heat bother me, and anything I add on might get frozen and shatter, or just burn off. He hesitated, then gently bumped his shoulder against hers. I like yours, though. Ashido grinned. Aw, thanks. After some consideration, Ashido had done away with her mask entirely. Between her skin, eyes, and horns, it wasn't like she could do much to hide her identity anyway. For the winter months, she had added a beige high-collar jacket with sleeves that ended just above her elbows. She'd wanted the nanotech material for her bodysuit, but it wasn't possible to make it acid-proof. Uraraka, on the other hand, had replaced her own bodysuit with the nanotech. It gave her costume a slight sheen when it caught the light. It might have been Midoriya's bias, but when she used her wings, it made her look even more like an angel. Yaoyorozu had adjusted her costume for the cold, even though it would keep her warm. She'd extended the leggings down to her boots, closed up the hole in the chest, and added short sleeves that went just past her shoulders. Sui hadn't done anything to adjust her costume. It had been programmed to automatically warm her up or cool her down as the environment changed. She had, however, mentioned that she was thinking of cutting her hair after a nightmare about her fight with Rappa, in which he'd caught her by her long hair and killed her. The jury was still out whether or not she would do it. All right, everyone calm down, Aizawa said, even though no one was actually acting out. We're going to ground Gamma. The bus is going to be here in 5 minutes. I suggest you get some stretching in, because you're going to need it. As the students prepared themselves, Uraraka made her way over to Midoriya and Yaoyorozu. Hey, Momo, Deku-kun, any idea what we're doing? Yaoyorozu sighed. You make it sound like Aizawa-sensei tells us things beforehand. But, since we're in costume today, it's probably a simulation for real-world applications. Or something challenging enough that we'd need support items, Midoriya added. Uraraka nodded, then went back to stretching. After the raid on the 8 precepts, she had stopped being scared of Aizawa's lessons. She wasn't going to become arrogant, but there was a big difference between a lesson and a fight for your life. Still, now I'm curious, Yaoyorozu said. Will this be a team exercise? A competition between us? There is so much to consider. It could also be a no-holds-barred fight, Midoriya suggested. Maybe Power Loader ran out of robots today. I didn't even know he could, Yaoyorozu joked. The bus pulled up, and the students piled in. It was a relatively quiet ride, save for when Kirishima joked too loudly next to Bakugou, who shouted at him to shut up or die. Fortunately, the rest of the class had long since learned to tune him out. Ground Gamma was exactly the same, pipes and concrete stretching as far as the eye could see. There was plenty of places to hide, but also plenty of flat, even spaces. Everything seemed equal, so that no one location had a clear advantage. The only thing that was different for Class 1 was that their counterparts were also present, and they both looked equally surprised. Hey, guys, Tendo waved. I guess we're doing a joint training exercise. Something like that, Aizawa said, and pulled out his phone and tossed it to his own counterpart. Today will be a competition between your classes, and since Vlad is here, I'll let him explain the rest. Vlad King obviously hadn't been expecting to be put on the spot, because he nearly tripped. Wait, what? Then he scowled at Aizawa, already tucked into his sleeping bag. Oh, you son of a, fine. Alright, you scrubs, everyone line up by class. I want 2 rows of 10 per class, representatives in front. Nobody wanted to make themselves a target of the grumpy teacher, so the 2 classes moved with purpose. Midoriya shared a worried look with Yaoyorozu, then kept his eyes locked ahead when Vlad King neared. The bulky hero tapped a few buttons on Aizawa's phone. A moment later, a small drone flew in and deployed a holographic screen. Here's the deal, Vlad said. Each class will be divided into 5 teams of 4, picked randomly by computer. You will then be pitted against a team from the other class. Your objective will be twofold. First, to capture all members of the opposing team, and bring them back to a cage in your assigned base. The second objective will be to guard your base from the opposing team, because if they touch the cage, they can free anyone trapped inside, and are given a 30-second head start before you can chase them again. How you go about this is up to you. You can have one person guard the camp while everyone else goes hunting, or divide yourselves equally. Any questions? Theodore raised his hand. Excuse me, but what if neither team is able to completely capture the other? Vlad blinked, then flipped through Aizawa's notes. Knew I shouldn't have let him write this by himself, aha. If there is no immediate winner, then whoever has the most enemies captured after 10 minutes is declared the winner. In the event of a draw, whichever team captures the first enemy immediately wins. He blinked again, then squinted at something on the phone. How come this isn't in the first part of the instructions? Anyway, after teams are drawn, you'll all have 10 minutes to come up with a strategy, but you are not allowed to strategize when the exercise actually starts. Vlad pressed a button, and pictures of the students began appearing on the screen. A few seconds later, Midoriya saw who was on which team. Team A, Midoriya Izuku, Uraraka Ochako, Asui Tsuyu, Jiro Kyoka. Team B, Ida Tenya, Yaoyorozu Momo, Ajiro Mashirao, Kaminari Denki. Team C, Minda Minoru, Todoroki Shoto, Takoyami Fumikage, Hagakure Toru. Team D, Koda Koji, Shoji Mizo, Aoyama Yuga, Shiro Hanta. Team E, Ashido Mina, Bakugou Katsuki, Sato Rakido, Kirishima Ajiro. Team F, Tsubiraba Kosai, Yanagi Ryaiko, Fukadashi Manga, Rin Huryu. Team G, Komori Kinoko, Kurwaro Shihai, Shishida Jiroda, Takage Setsuna. Team H, Owasiosu, Mono Manito, Bondo Kajiro, Kamakiri Tagaru. Team I, Tetsu, Kendo Itsuka, Honuki Juzo, Shota Nyaranjiki. Team J, Shizaki Ibara, Tsunotori Pony, Kaibara Sen, Kodai Yui. A moment later, the teams on the screen were scattered and paired up. Team A versus Team G. Team B versus Team I. Team C versus Team J. Team D versus Team H. Team E versus Team F. Midoriya was actually quite happy with his team, Uraraka, for obvious reasons, and Asui because she was one of his best friends. He wasn't as close with Jiro, but they got along, and she seemed happy to be on his team, if her smile was anything to go by. Everyone else in his class seemed content with their teammates except for Ashido, who was glaring daggers at Bakugou and receiving them as well. Midoriya tried not to grimace. Ashido had not been subtle about how much she disliked Bakugou. Part of it was because Bakugou hadn't made a good first impression, made worse by the sports festival. But mostly it was because Ashido hadn't gotten over how badly Bakugou had mistreated her twin. Midoriya sighed, and tried not to think about that right now. His main worry was that he actually didn't know that much about Class 1B. The two classes hardly interacted, and he knew almost nothing about their quirks. Those few he did know about weren't on the team he was facing. Moreover, he wouldn't be surprised if Class 1B had been studying his classmates' quirks. After all, nearly all of them had been televised. Okay, kids, time to strategize. Vlad barked. Get going. Midoriya barely waved at his friends on other teams and found a quiet spot with the rest of Team A. So, Vice Prez, got any ideas? Gyro asked, nervously twirling one of her jacks. We don't know squat about the other team. I'm sure Deku-kun has a plan, Uraraka said, and smiled at her boyfriend. Right, Midoriya couldn't take his opponent's abilities into account, so he focused on what he did know. Okay, we're going to have to be cautious at first. Here's what I'm thinking. In a slight surprise to everyone, the order of the matches was also randomized. Midoriya had hoped his team would be first, just because waiting made him more anxious. Instead, his match was last. He would have to settle for watching everyone else's matches via the projector on the wall. At least he could take notes on Class 1B's quirks and skills. The first match was Team E against Team F. All Midoriya could think about was how worried he was that Ishido was going to antagonize Bakugou into doing something reckless. Or vice versa. Alright, extras, everyone remember the plan. Bakugou narrowed his eyes at Ishido. I'm looking at you, raccoon eyes. Ishido barely glanced at him. Yeah, I'm good. Just one question. Make it snappy. You're sure we shouldn't have someone guarding the base after we catch someone? Bakugou shook his head. Not if we catch them all in one go. Ishido really wanted to argue with him, but his logic made sense. If they stayed together, it would be impossible for the other team to pick them off and force them to either get picked off or risk a full battle with a team of heavy hitters. The only thing that bothered her was that they knew absolutely nothing about their opponents or their quirks. I guess we'll just get out there and hope for the best, she thought. Then a buzzer sounded, and Bakugou cracked his knuckles. Okay, let's kick some ass. Kirishima, go. Right. Kirishima hardened his forearms and led the way in a reckless charge. Should we be worried about him? Sato muttered as he ran alongside Ishido. Hey, he should be fine, Ishido said. He can take a beating from Midori, after all. Good point. Sato blinked as something caught his attention. Bakugou, move. With a quick explosion, Bakugou hurled himself out of the way, and even managed to snag Kirishima on the way. They both narrowly avoided a barrage of what looked like green darts, which dug deep into the metal pipes and concrete floor. Nice reflexes, a voice taunted, and Ishido looked up to see Rinryu standing on what seemed like thin air. He wore a black costume with yellow clouds, white boots and yellow bracers, and a white visor. His skin, formerly pale, was now covered in green scales. Bakugou sneered. Why don't you come down here and I'll show you how good my reflexes are. How is he floating up there? Ishido wondered. He doesn't have two quirks, does he? More projectiles came flying in, but instead of scales, they were chunks of concrete and metal, surrounded by a purple aura. Bakugou dodged again, but Kirishima couldn't quite manage, and had to harden his entire body to withstand the barrage. Ishido whirled, and saw Yanagi Ryuko. Her light purple kimono and white furred collar matched nicely with her gray hair, and the way she held her hands up reminded Ishido of Asui. Behind her was Tsuburaba Kosai, with his odd eyes. Not that Ishido was one to talk, an almost casual costume of beige pants, black shirt, and blue jacket. The style reminded her of Midoriya's costume, and suggested that he didn't need any kind of support items for him to fight. Kosai, I need more ammunition, Yanagi said calmly. I ran out of debris. You got it, Ryuko. Tsuburaba took a deep breath and let it out, but nothing seemed to happen. That changed when Yanagi used her own quirk, and a purple aura appeared around an invisible platform. She held out one hand, and the platform spun like a discus at the one of students. I've got this. Sato drew back his fist and smashed it against the platform, which shattered into pieces. Sato blinked in surprise. I didn't even need to use my quirk. Kosai, more. Tsuburaba let out a series of short, shallow breaths. It almost looked like he was hyperventilating. Yanagi's quirk revealed that he had created dozens of tiny platforms, barely bigger than her hand, and launched them again. Kirishima, block. Bakugou ordered. Sugar moron, go after Breath Boy. I'll get Scaly. Raccoon Eyes, go find their fourth. It turned out that Ishido didn't need to go far. Boom. To Ishido's surprise, a giant boom literally appeared in front of her and fell at her feet. As soon as it touched the ground, it exploded like an actual bomb, and it sent her careening through the air. She would have landed on her head, but her training with Sky Dancer paid off, and she was able to recover with a, mostly, graceful backflip. That must be Fukadashi, she muttered. Fukadashi manga had arguably the strangest secondary element of his quirk Ishido had ever seen. From the collar down, he appeared completely normal, wearing red pants and a blue shirt with red sleeves, along with white gloves and white boots. His head, however, was literally a white speech bubble, and he used a white manga page as a mask. How does that even work? Ishido wondered. Man, quirks are weird sometimes. Fukadashi crouched and aimed his face directly at her. Bam! The word bam formed in front of him and shot at her like a rocket. She rolled out of the way and hurled a horizontal crescent of acid at him. Roar! Once again, the word appeared in front of him, which emitted a 3-second blast of sound that burst the acid into 1,000 droplets. Rather than let him try to counter, Ishido had already followed up with another glob of acid that burst between his feet. He jumped as the acid ate away at the concrete, then jumped right when Ishido did it again. There was only an instant for her to grin as he moved exactly where she wanted him to go. Sato, right swing now. Sato, trusting his teammate implicitly, swung his meaty fist in a wide arc that caught Fukadashi in the back of the head. He stumbled forward and tried to recover, but Ishido was already moving. She jumped up, and her knee connected solidly with Fukadashi's strange face. He groaned and took one step and then another before collapsing. Yes, perfect shot. Ishido didn't have much time to celebrate, because Yanagi caught her in the shoulder with another platform thrown by her telekinesis. That was all she had left, because Kirishima grabbed her and locked her arms behind her back. Tsuburaba took a deep breath, but what came out was a pathetic wheeze when Sato buried his fist in his gut, and he collapsed. Fantastic work, boys. Ishido grinned. Now we just need to find Baku. There was a yelp of pain, and a scorched and battered Rin fell out of the sky. Bakugou slowed his own descent with a small explosion, but he still landed with some momentum on Rin's back, prompting another yelp. Pathetic, Bakugou sneered. Don't forget why we're the top class, wimps. Team E wins. An automated voice announced. Please return to the starting area. Bakugou nodded. Let's move, extras. He paused and glanced at his team. Good work. Ishido blinked and wondered if she was suffering a concussion again. Thanks, you too. Maybe he's getting better. Of course I did. Bakugou sneered again. I got mine without taking a scratch. The rest of you are basically helpless without me. Ishido sighed. Okay, maybe not that much better. Class 1 cheered as the first match ended in a victory for them, especially the rising stars. Still, Midoriya wondered what might have happened if the fight hadn't started and ended as quickly as it had. He'd feared that Ishido's issues with Bakugou would cause friction within the group, but Bakugou had been polite relatively speaking and hadn't given anyone time to argue once the action started. Great work, you guys, he said as Team E returned. Ishido hugged him. Aw, thanks. You just make sure you win, okay? It's all or nothing for twins. Hey, Vlad King loomed over them menacingly. Save your mushy crap for later. You're supposed to be heroes, now act like it. Midoriya flinched, but Ishido just stuck her tongue out at him. Behind Vlad, Aizawa just smirked at her response, and made a mental note to award her a few extra points. If Vlad was going to be a sore loser, then Aizawa would just rub salt in the wound. Alright, Team B and Team I, get your asses out there. The second round did not go nearly as smoothly for Class 1A. Yaoyorozu couldn't help but shake that thought as she ran through the maze of pipes, and that bothered her. She didn't have the same kind of grudge against Bakugou that Ishido did, but the idea of doing worse than the one who had tormented her sort of little brother annoyed her. At first, her team had done well, capturing Shota and Tetsu early on. Then, Ida had been knocked out by a clothesline from Kendo and captured, followed by Kaminari. Ajiro had fought Kendo in a one-on-one battle, and had been holding his own, until Kendo pulled back, and he was ambushed by Honuki. He had just locked up Ajiro when he was defeated by Yaoyorozu, but also had to retreat from Kendo before she could free her teammates. Now, all she could do was play a game of cat and mouse to see who could either free their teammates, or defeat the other before time ran out. A flicker of motion out of the corner of her eye made her lean back, and slid feet first into a corner. Kendo walked around the corner, one hand twice the size of her own body. She wore a turquoise kippah with long sleeves that went down to her knees, black shorts, and a black domino mask. Her cocky smile might have been more intimidating, but she had a few bruises from Ajiro, and some burns on her regular-sized hand from Kaminari. Hey, Yaoyorozu, Kendo said, and took a deep breath. This is kinda cool, right? One class president against the other. I suppose there is something poetic about that. Yaoyorozu agreed, and took stock of their respective conditions. Kendo had done much of the fighting for her team, and it showed, but Yaoyorozu could analyze someone's skills almost as well as Midoriya, and knew that her fighting abilities came up short when compared to her counterpart. Yaoyorozu was also nearly at her limit, having used up most of her lipids early in the match. At least it's about to pay off, she thought. Shall we finish this? She asked, and shifted so that her left arm and leg were out of Kendo's line of sight. Kendo charged. I'm not going to give you a chance to make anything. Yaoyorozu smirked. She had already made something, and had hidden it in one of her skirt's pockets. She pressed the button, which triggered one of two catapults that rested on the other side of the wall she'd been cornered against. The catapult launched a large, weighted net that tangled up Kendo's giant fingers and sent her stumbling. Yaoyorozu then triggered the second catapult, which deposited a tranquilizer gun into her waiting hands. In one smooth motion, she raised the gun, took aim, and fired. The tranquilizer dart sank into Kendo's leg, and in seconds, she couldn't even stand. Kendo looked up at her in disbelief. When did you have time to make those? Yaoyorozu finished, and smiled. I made contingencies for situations where I would be outnumbered, or at least forced to fight against the last opponent. You were the only one on your team whose quirk I knew, so I lured you to a trap I set up for you in particular. That's why I wasn't doing much fighting. I had to guarantee that my team would be victorious. Kendo laughed as she started to lose consciousness. And here I thought you were just directing everyone. No, they were just buying time for me to finish this. Yaoyorozu sighed in relief when her team's victory was announced. She didn't say it out loud, but that had been her very last gambit. Had it failed, it would have been a very different ending to the match. Things went downhill for Class 1A after that. Team C lost after a final one-on-one showdown between Todoroki and Tsunotori, who managed to drop half a building on him with her rocket horns. Team D lost when each of them was bonded to a wall, thanks to some careful maneuvering and liberal use of Oasis' quirk, which was copied by Monoma. By the time the final match rolled around, everyone was anxiously waiting to see who would break the tie and score the ultimate win for their class. Good luck, guys, Ashido called out, while a semi-conscious Todoroki waved from where he lay on his girlfriend's lap. Yaoyorozu, Ida and Siro all tried to echo the sentiment, but they were too exhausted to do much more than that. Uraraka had her helmet on, and its tint let her observe her boyfriend without looking like it, and she noticed something had changed in him. Before the 8 Precepts raid, he had always been less insecure when talking strategy, but now there was a steadiness in his gaze and voice that just made everyone shut up and pay attention. Even without knowing what their opponents could do, Midoriya had taken his own team's quirks and talents into consideration, creating what he saw as the best way to win, regardless of what Class B threw at them. Are you set? He asked as they arrived at their base. The cage was a little goofy, with a giant cutout of Nezu sitting on top, and nothing else around it to use for cover. Just give the word, Deku-kun, Uraraka said. Asui nodded. You gave us a good plan, Ribbit. I think this will work. Gyro grinned. Ready to rock, Vice Prez. Final match begin. Midoriya vanished in a flash of green light. Okay, Ochako, let's go. If there was one person in Class 1A that their counterparts didn't want to face, it was Midoriya Izuku. True, Monoma would go on and on about how everyone in 1A was inferior to them, and Kendo tried convincing them all that any team-related events could see them defeat Midoriya if they all worked together. No one really bought it. The idea of someone with as many powers as Midoriya genuinely frightened most of them, especially after they watched the footage of him defeating Chisaki. It didn't help that had become one of the most trending videos online, and they were reminded of it every time they looked at their recommendations list. Only one Class B student actually looked forward to facing Midoriya. She didn't necessarily want to fight him, but she thought he was cute and fun to mess with. That had become the cornerstone of Take's strategy to defeat Team A, as far as she was concerned. If they could either take Midoriya down, or at least keep him out of the way, they could win in the end. Still, we shouldn't underestimate the rest of his team, Shishida had advised. Getting tunnel vision will only hasten our defeat. I know that, but we have to assume that Midoriya is the biggest threat, Take had argued. Those 3 girls on his team are good, but they can't shoot lasers or turn into a giant. Shishida adjusted his square-rimmed glasses and nodded in a way only a proper gentleman could. He was the most chivalrous and polite student in Class 1B, which Take found hilarious. His personality was completely at odds with his bestial appearance, with a jutting lower jaw and sharp fangs, and shaggy brown fur that covered his entire body. Eventually, Take's team agreed with her strategy, and when the match began, they went out hunting. Take herself allowed Shishida to carry her, while she focused on finding their prey, Pieces of her body began detaching and flying in different directions. That was the power of her quirk, Lizard Tail Split. She could divide herself into as many as 50 pieces and control them no matter the distance. If she detached an eye or an ear, she could see or hear as easily as if they were still attached to her head. Even if the pieces were destroyed, she could regenerate over time. Recovery Girl had theorized that as long as the majority of her brain was intact, and at least some of her internal organs, it was possible that she couldn't be killed. It had taken a lot of convincing by her parents and friends to not test that theory. "I can see one of them," Takage announced, and her team came to a halt. They tried not to grimace at the sight of her head missing both eyes and one ear. "Yeah, it's Uraraka. Damn, those wings are cool. Looks like she's searching for us. Can you see any of the others?" Kiwaro asked. Takage shook her head. Her long hair smacked Shishida in the face, though he was gracious enough not to complain. "Nah, just her. She's probably staying close to the others to give them a heads up. But I don't see them yet." Kiwaro's teammates were just glad he was talking again. He'd been various stages of grief after his cousin, Shade Dart, had been killed by the League of Villains. Apparently, they had been very close, and Kiwaro had wanted to intern with him, but things kept preventing that. Now, it would never happen. "Okay, she's in the air," Takage continued. "I'll try to clip her wings, and then you take her down, Jiroda. Shihai, you take her back to our base. Kanoko can guard her while you come back to us." Kiwaro nodded, and sank into the shadows, ready to spring as soon as Uraraka was close enough. Takage divided herself further, leaving only her torso, mouth, and one ear floating by Shishida. The rest swarmed towards Uraraka. With her tinted visor, Takage could only imagine Uraraka's expression. She figured that it would freak her out to see pieces of a human being flying around her like a macabre jigsaw puzzle. The distraction would hold until one of Takage's hands disabled Uraraka's wings, without propulsion. The rest of her pieces would have no trouble pushing Uraraka down to the ground. What happened instead surprised her. A small, silver creature flew out from under Uraraka's helmet, and transformed into a giant sea turtle. "What the heck?" Takage thought. "I've never seen those before. How many forms does Midoriya have?" Terraspin unleashed a massive gust of wind, scattering some of Takage's pieces and driving others to the ground. Takage winced as she felt each impact. Just because her pieces weren't attached to her didn't mean she didn't feel the pain. "Fall back," Takage shouted, as her pieces flew towards her and reattached. "They made us." Shishida pulled Takage along as she reassembled, while Kiwaro darted through the shadows back to their base. This had been their backup plan. If they couldn't take down Midoriya in time, or failed to pick off any of his teammates, they would go back to their base, where they could fight on their terms. Komori was waiting for them, sitting on the top of the cage. So, did the plan not work? Takage shook her head, and Komori sighed. Between her red outfit with white spots and the way she was perched, she looked just like a mushroom. Knowing her, that was clearly the point. Uraraka flew in, but as soon as she saw what was waiting for her, she pulled up and eyed the Class B students cautiously. Takage didn't blame her. Komori had used her quirk, Mushroom, to create clumps of the fungus in strategic locations around the base. Their true power was kept in check by Komori, so her teammates could stand by the mushrooms without worry. But as soon as the class of students got close, their job was to throw said students into the mushrooms and let Komori do her thing. "What's the matter, Uraraka?" Takage taunted. "Afraid of little Alas." Takage would later swear that Uraraka was grinning underneath her helmet. "Nah, just waiting for Deku-kun to do a little gardening." At that moment, Jetray swooped in and turned into heat blasts. He could have unleashed waves of flame upon the entire team, but didn't. Instead, he just stood there and let his natural heat dry out and kill the mushrooms. Crap, Takage thought, I forgot about that one. It's hard to keep track of what he can do. Now, Heat Blast shouted. The ground trembled, and then broke apart under Gyro's sonic assault, sending Takage and her team staggering. Shishida recovered first, and roared. His body grew, his hair lengthened, and his lower fangs looked more like tusks. He bowled past Takage and lunged for Heat Blast, who transformed into fourarms before he accidentally burned the 1B student. That had been one of Takage's other ideas. Had this been a real fight against a villain, they wouldn't have hesitated to burn Shishida for getting too close. However, this wasn't a real fight, and Takage wasn't above using that to make sure Midoriya didn't use one of his more dangerous forms. Surprised as he was by the sudden blitz, Fourarms was tackled off his feet. Shishida managed to get a few good hits in, but then Uraraka launched her prosthetic hand at him, instantly removing gravity's effect on him. Fourarms pushed him up and let him fly away like a balloon, then got to his feet, just in time to see Kiwaro jump out of the shadows aiming at Gyro. Rather than seem surprised, Gyro smirked, and Kurwaro was caught by Asui's tongue as her camouflage faded. Uraraka whipped the cable with her hand attached right into Kurwaro's face, applying her quirk again. An instant later, Asui pulled him along behind her like a kite, heading right for the class base. 2 down, Uraraka said, as her hand was reeled back to her arm. 2 to go, forearms finished, and turned into shock squatch. Gyro rolled her eyes. Ugh, you two are finishing sentences now. Gross. Takage tried to think of a strategy to turn things around, but came up blank. With her stealth specialist and muscle gone, she was out of options. A quick glance at her remaining teammate told her that Komori was as stuck as she was. We surrender, she announced. I don't see any way for us to win. As the bell sounded, Uraraka cheered, and Gyro pumped a fist. Midoriya, however, looked up. Achako, could you let Shishida-san down? Uraraka froze. Oh, right, sorry. Class 10 was already starting to celebrate by the time Midoriya's team returned. Ishido grabbed Midoriya and Uraraka in a big hug, while Shiro kissed Asui full on the mouth. While the rest of the class wasn't quite so affectionate, even those who lost their matches were in a great mood. Bakugou even managed to keep a civil conversation with everyone who spoke to him, while Aizawa was humble in his class victory, and only smirked triumphantly at Vlad King. Midoriya grinned with the rest of his friends, and when he saw Uraraka leaning in to kiss him, he wished this moment would never end. And, when Uraraka and the entire world around him froze in place, he wondered if his wish had come true. Midoriya blinked and waved his hand in front of Uraraka's face. She didn't blink or show any sort of reaction. What is going on? He asked, more confused than anything else at that moment. Did I just die? Am I going insane? Neither, actually. Midoriya whirled, and saw a man in a white lab coat standing where he very clearly hadn't been a moment before. Hello, young man. Who are you? Midoriya tensed, and the Omnitrix activated in response to his anxiety. What did you do to my friends? The man held up one hand. The other, Midoriya now noticed, hung limply at his side, and blood dripped down his fingers. I mean you no harm. Izukumidoriya. Oh, my apologies. I believe I said your name in the Western style. You can call me Professor Paradox. I am an old friend of BEN10. As for everyone else here, well, I stopped time in order to speak to you without interruption. Midoriya didn't relax. Prove you know Ben. Paradox smiled, but it was sad. Such a shame you're not more trusting. He pointed at Midoriya's pocket. I've given you special dispensation to call Ben, even with time frozen as it is. Ask him yourself if I'm trustworthy. Midoriya frowned, but did as he was asked. After a few rings, someone answered the phone. Hello, this is BEN10. Ben, it's me, Izuku. Hey, kid, what's up? Midoriya didn't take his eyes off of the man in front of him. Do you know someone calling himself Professor Paradox? He nearly jumped when he heard the sound of something breaking, followed by muffled curses. Listen to me very carefully, Izuku. Ben's voice was deadly serious, in a way Midoriya recognized from heroes who were about to be in a life or death situation. Paradox is a friend, and I trust him with my life. If he's with you, then something big is happening. He wouldn't give me details, but this is Major League, end of the universe stuff. No, I'm not exaggerating. Do what he says, okay. Oh okay. Midoriya blinked when Paradox abruptly held out his hand. I think he wants to talk to you. Here. Paradox took the phone and held it to his ear. Hello, Ben. Izuku and I will be on the watchtower in 10 minutes. Please have Hangar 2 completely vacated of personnel by the time we arrive, except for your daughter. Also, have 3 trauma kits and one of those delightful little surgical robots waiting with her. I'll be bringing in several injured. Thank you, old friend. People are hurt. Midoriya asked when Paradox hung up. Why are we waiting 10 minutes? Paradox smiled. Dear boy, I'm a time traveler. 10 minutes for the rest of the world. Uraraka stumbled when she saw that her boyfriend was suddenly gone. What just happened? Is less than a second for me. Midoriya looked around as he tried to get his bearings. He'd never been inside one of the watchtower's hangars before, but he recognized the technology from his previous visits. I thought you said you traveled through time, he said. You can also travel between universes. It's Professor Paradox, Jen commented as she stepped around a stack of metal crates. You learn to stop questioning it, or your head will explode. Hey, cousin, how are things? Hello, Jennifer, Paradox said, cutting Midoriya off before he could speak. Did you bring the supplies I asked for? Jen hefted a container 4 times her size in one hand. Got him right here. Who needs what? Paradox smiled and snapped his fingers. Midoriya yelped when what looked like a green airplane appeared right in front of him. Its paint was scratched and weathered, and it smelled like it had been pulled out of a fire. Midoriya swallowed nervously when he saw blood coating part of the landing gear. It's all right, Paradox called out, you're among friends now. The door to the plane opened up, and a ramp extended. The young man, maybe 2 or 3 years older than Midoriya, cautiously stepped out. He wore civilian clothes that were slightly torn and stained, and had messy black hair. He had the look of someone that had seen too much already but kept going out of spite, or because he didn't know what else to do. "We need those medical supplies, Professor," he said. "Julie's not looking too good, and Gwen, man, I don't even know what's wrong with her." There was a clatter, and Midoriya jumped. The other man had it worse, and looked ready to throw a punch. The source of the noise came from Jen, who had dropped the supplies and was staring at the ladder with her hands over her mouth. "Oh my god," she whispered, then glared daggers at Paradox. "Are you kidding me? Do you know what this will do to Dad if he knows that they're here? Which is exactly why I only asked for your aid." "Jennifer," Paradox said gently, "of all your family, you will be the least traumatized by this. Now, please get the trauma kits into the ship, or Miss Yamamoto will not survive the next hour." Jen visibly shook herself, then grabbed the equipment and marched into the plane. She used her free hand to lift and move the young man when he started to block her path. "Out of my way, delinquent, I've got lives to save," said Delinquent, glowered, but calmed when Paradox put his uninjured hand on his shoulder. "All will be explained shortly. While Jennifer works, why don't I introduce you to someone?" He guided him down the ramp and gestured to Midoriya. "This is Izukumidoriya, wielder of the OMNITRIX in his universe. Mr. Midoriya, meet Kevin Levin, former criminal, and one of Ben Tennyson's closest friends." Kevin looked Midoriya up and down. "Nice hoodie. Thanks. Your eyes are weird, though." Midoriya pulled off back his left sleeve, exposing the green lines carved into his flesh. "There's a weird reason for why I'm like that." Instead of staring or looking repulsed, Kevin just raised an eyebrow. "Not the first time I've seen something like that." Midoriya blinked. "Really?" Kevin sighed. "Yeah, you'll see what I mean in a bit." Abruptly, he stumbled and nearly fell, but steadied himself at the last second. Midoriya cautiously approached him. "Are you okay?" "No." Kevin put his hands on his face and slowly dragged them down. "As far as I can tell, everyone I care about who's still alive is on that plane. Everything was fine a couple hours ago." Midoriya opened his mouth to say something, but realized that there was nothing he could say that would help. Not to help Kevin feel better, at any rate. Midoriya knew that heroes, at least in his universe, had to know how to deal with trauma, but it was another thing entirely to be told by a complete stranger that most of their world was dead, and being expected to help. What happened?" Midoriya asked. "I don't even know why I'm here right now. I was just told that the universe depended." "Son of a bitch." Jen ran to the door of the plane, her hands covered in blood. "Izuku, I need you up here right now." Midoriya wasn't a pro-hero, but he had already recognized that tone. Whatever was going on was so critical that he didn't have time to ask questions. Instead, he sprinted up the ramp, the OMNITRIX activated before he got to her. "Tell me what to do. I need big chill. Get your ice breath ready, apply it where and when I say." Midoriya transformed before she finished speaking, but he nearly stopped when he saw the condition of the person he was going to help. It was a teenage girl with black hair, maybe around his age, who looked Japanese. He couldn't be sure because of all the blood on her face. Her tattered clothes were in a pile on a chair, and her dignity was only preserved by a sheet. Sitting next to her was what looked like a black slug with green circuitry over its skin. Green blood oozed out from several deep gashes across its body. "Okay, we need to slow down her bodily functions, keep her organs intact, but don't let them shut down," Jen said briskly. "Basically, we're cryogenically freezing her. Start with her brain, top of the head, but don't go to the eyes." Big Chill leaned in close to the girl and began exhaling. Ice crystals appeared in her hair, and after a few more breaths, it almost looked like a helmet of ice was covering her head. "Crap." Jen looked over the unconscious girl, her eyes glowing from her X-ray vision. "What happened to her? It looks like her heart, her lungs shit, her entire vascular system is just dissolving. What can we do?" Big Chill asked. "Unless you've got a spare cardiovascular system in your pocket, there's not much we can do." Jen scowled, but then stopped as an idea came to her. She scooped up the little slug creature, looked into its single eye. "Could you do it? You can turn into any machine, right?" The alien tilted its head. "Ship, the human body is just an organic machine. Can you do it?" Ship. The alien turned into a black and green puddle and slipped out of Jen's hands. It then slithered up to the unconscious girl and crawled into one of her open wounds. Big Chill was repulsed, but also fascinated. "What's happening?" Jen sank into another chair, looking tired and grief-stricken. Ship was already dying. "He's going to sacrifice himself to become a permanent part of Julie's anatomy." He'll turn into her heart, her lungs, and all of her veins. If it works, it shouldn't be too hard to fix the rest of her injuries. Julie groaned in pain and writhed on the table. Jen's super strength was more than enough to keep her still, but it looked like she was having a little trouble. As they watched, Julie's veins reappeared under her skin, but they were now green and glowed eerily. Then she took a deep breath and her eyes snapped open. Midoriya noticed that they were just like his, with glowing green irises and black sclere. "Ship," Julie whispered groggily as she sat up. He's gone, but I can still hear him in my head. What's going on?" Jen let her go and stepped back. "I'm not sure. You were both dying, so I took a gamble. My best guess. You're now one person. If you were to separate now, you'd die." "Oh." Julie put her hand over her heart, and then lay back down and started to cry. "Give her some space," another girl, one Big Chill hadn't noticed in his rush, said quietly. We've all had a really bad day." Big Chill tried not to stare. At first glance, she seemed normal until he saw her face. She wore black pants and a black vest over a red shirt, with long red hair in a ponytail, but that was the only ordinary thing about her. The part of her face that was still human was pretty, but the left half was covered in wide cracks, like broken pottery, and her left eye was a neon pink orb. The cracks themselves glowed purple, like her skin was just a thin layer that covered something more, or perhaps less, than human. Jen stared at her for a moment and then nodded. "Yeah, I get it. Come on, Izuku, we need to talk. The medical robots should take care of the rest." "So, that girl with the red hair is Ben's cousin." Midoriya paused. "His real cousin, I mean, not like me." "Kinda," Jen said. "If you did a DNA test, it'd say they were cousins, but she's from another universe. From what I figure, it's probably almost identical to Dad's original universes. Some are really similar, others aren't." Midoriya filed that away for later consideration, though he wondered if there were other universes with counterparts to himself. "And that guy, Kevin, is the other Ben's, best friend, right? Going by his age, they're past the trying to kill each other part of their history." Jen chuckled when she saw the look on Midoriya's face. "Yeah, that happened. A couple of times, actually." After leaving the plane, Jen had excused herself to get cleaned up. Once she'd washed all the blood off her hands, she returned to give Midoriya a crash course in understanding the multiverse, as well as introducing the strangers he'd suddenly become acquainted with. "What about the other girl?" "Julie." Jen winced. She was Dad's girlfriend." "Did they break up?" "No, she died. So did Gwen, Kevin, and everyone else Dad cared about on his old Earth. The only ones who survived were Grandma Verdona and Ship." Jen gestured to the plane. "I'm guessing those three, are the only survivors from their Earth." Now it was Midoriya who winced. "Doesn't that mean that they're Ben?" "I'm trying really hard not to think about it," Jen interrupted. "There are countless variations of Ben Tennyson," Paradox said softly. "Just as there are countless variations of all of you. Some of them die, some of them live, and many are so different from each other that it's almost impossible to compare them." "Doesn't mean I have to think about any of them dying," Jen retorted, and then stood up. "They're coming out." Midoriya turned and saw Gwen, Kevin, and Julie walking down the ramp. They were all clean, and even their clothes had been repaired. "I didn't know you guys had clean clothes," Jen commented. "We didn't," Kevin said. "Gwen just used her powers to fix our stuff." "Cool." Jen looked at Julie. "How are you feeling?" "Better." Julie shrugged. "That robot you gave us stitched me up. I'm sore and stiff, but I'm doing a lot better. I think Ship is actually speeding up the process." "Okay, so now for the million-dollar question." Gwen looked Paradox in the eye. "Why are we here? And why didn't you save Ben?" "That was 2 questions," Paradox said mildly. "I've got a third." Kevin pointed at Paradox's arm. "How come you're still bleeding?" "Oh, I nearly forgot about that." Paradox closed his eyes. There was a flash of light, and then it was like he had never been hurt at all. "I didn't even know you could be hurt," Gwen said. "There is much you don't know about me." In that moment, Paradox seemed impossibly sad. "But perhaps we should stay on topic. Ironically, time is a luxury we cannot afford, right?" Gwen waved her hand, and 3 pink rectangles appeared. She, Julie, and Kevin sat on the hovering platforms. "Let's get this over with." Midoriya shared a worried look with Jen. Gwen wasn't just trying to hide her feelings behind a mask. It was like she wasn't feeling anything at all. However, there wasn't much they could do at the moment, and settled in to listen to Paradox. "A great threat has escaped its prison," Paradox said. "He wants to destroy all of creation, the entire multiverse, and rebuild it in his own image." "We know that," Kevin said. "We watched it happen on our Earth." "This was more for Izuku and Jennifer's benefit," Paradox said archly, then continued. He has gained the ability to break down entire universes and consume their energy. More than that, he can create entire armies of monsters with that same power and have them destroy universes on his behalf. With every universe destroyed, he grows in might and is spreading across the multiverse like a plague. At this point, no one can match him in pure strength. I'm guessing it won't be as simple as punching this guy anyway, Jen said, rather than asked. Indeed, if it were so simple, things would not be so dire. Paradox smiled. The multiverse is, in a way, as alive as the infinite amount of people living in it. It may not be aware, like we are, but it can recognize a threat and how to give itself a fighting chance. If for want of a better term, it chose you all, who held the key to its survival. Paradox shrugged. We only need 2 more people and we can begin. I have a question. Midoriya held up his hand, like he was in class. Privately, he was impressed that he hadn't devolved into an anxious mess at this point, because this was way beyond anything he was prepared for. Why didn't you bring those 2 here? You brought the rest of us. He's got a point, Kevin said. Paradox sighed. My powers are being affected by this calamity. I am not able to read the flow of space and time as I once could. I was able to identify the 5 of you, as well as 1 other, but the last all I could decipher was that they have a connection to izukumidoriya, and that they contain a great power within. I will pick up the last of our little group before we depart. Midoriya was about to ask why Paradox didn't just grab whoever it was on his Earth that was supposed to go with them, but then he realized that if they had a connection to him, then he had a better chance of getting them on board than Paradox was. Contains a great power within. Who could that be? Midoriya froze. Wait, I think I know who you're talking about, he said, shooting to his feet. And I'm positive you'll help out. Excellent. Paradox smiled. I'll send you and Miss Yamamoto to your school to retrieve him. You'll have to be careful. As I said, time is not on our side, and I will not be able to halt its advance once you get there. One last thing, Jen said. Who the heck are we actually fighting? I mean, does this eldritch horror have a name? Are we fighting Cthulhu? Because I really don't want to fight Cthulhu. It's Vilgax, Gwen said without preamble, but way more powerful than we've ever seen him before. It's far worse than that, Paradox said gravely. This is the Vilgax from your timeline, Jennifer. All traces of good humor vanished from Jen's face, replaced by confusion and horror. That's not possible. Tell that to all the dead people on our Earth, Kevin retorted. No, I mean, he got locked up in the Phantom Zone almost 30 years ago, Jen said. It's not like the Null Void, where it's got those emergency exits you can't get out, not without the projector, and there's only one of those. It's locked up at the North Pole. Less than 10 people even know exactly where, and fewer can even use it. I assure you, he did escape, Paradox said. Take Gwen and Kevin and see for yourself, if you truly doubt me. Vilgax is nothing if not adaptable. He has spent all those years learning the secrets of the Phantom Zone, and converting his own body into a vessel that could absorb its energies and use them to escape. I was not allowed to interfere until he actually escaped, in case my intervention made things worse. Now, I must do all I am allowed to by the multiverse itself to fix what has been broken. Midoriya had no idea who this Vilgax was, but the fear in Jen's eyes, the eyes of someone who could throw an aircraft carrier into orbit with some effort, told him to take this seriously. Julie stood up and turned to Midoriya. She tried to smile, but failed miserably. I guess we should get going, huh? You know, before things get worse. Alright. Midoriya glanced at Jen. See you soon. Jen nodded absently. Yeah, sure. I need to make sure Paradox is telling the truth. You go do your thing. Paradox put a hand on Midoriya's shoulder and the other on Julie's. As I said, my powers are being affected by this. The transition to your universe may be a bit more jarring than before. Julie, sprawled out on the floor, groaned. I think I left my stomach behind. Midoriya tried to keep his lunch down. This is worse than the first time I jumped universes. Julie sat up. Hey, Paradox is gone. Midoriya looked around. Sure enough, he was nowhere in sight. Maybe he'll pick us up when we find Mirio. Who? Sorry, Tagata Mirio. Midoriya got to his feet and helped Julie to hers. He's a hero course student, like me, but he's in his 3rd year. Hero course? What? Oh, right. Midoriya shrugged. I can explain everything when we have time. Sure, context would be nice. Julie looked around. This is a nice school. It's the best in Japan, Midoriya couldn't help but boast. You can show me around when the multiverse isn't about to die. Julie rubbed at her neck, where a scar was still healing. Where are we going? Midoriya saw a clock on the wall. Okay, we're between periods. Mirio should be heading to his dorm now. He turned into XLR8 and held out his claws. I know the way, I'll carry you. Julie hesitated, not out of fear, XLR8 could see, but probably because her Ben had likely done something similar with her. She shook her head and then let him carry her. XLR8 moved as fast as he dared, so quickly that even the students he passed who knew about this alien had no idea what blew past. In fact, he moved so quickly that he would have collided with Tagada had the third-year student not used his quirk to sink into the ground at the last second. Izuku, what's going on? Tagada asked as he climbed out of the ground and then scooped up his clothes. Who's the girl, and why does she have your eyes? You find a long-lost sister or something. Midoriya turned back to normal and set Julie down. Mirio, we need your help. Everyone needs your help. So this is the North Pole. Gwen frowned. It's not as cold as I thought it would be. Kevin raised an eyebrow, even as he shivered. Gwen, it's below F freezing. Gwen held up her hand and watched the snow fall on her skin. Huh, I barely feel it. That's not a good sign, Jen said as she approached the strange collection of what looked like icy pillars, stacked together. Try to keep from going full anodite if you can't control it, okay. Kevin glared at her. And how are you not cold? I'm half Kryptonian, genius, I barely feel the cold when I'm in space. Fine, whatever. Kevin looked up the structure. Jen had explained that, because of security precautions, she couldn't use the Watchtower's teleporter system to take strangers directly inside, and had to take them in through the front door. So, how do we get in? Jen grinned and pointed to a welcome mat. You're joking. Nope. Jen nudged the mat aside with her foot, and revealed a simple key. Try and pick it up. Kevin looked at Gwen, who shrugged, and then he reached for the key. Despite his best attempts, it remained firmly on the ground. Okay, I give up. What's the trick? Jen laughed, and then activated her Ultimatrix. Now a full Kryptonian, she easily picked up the key and used it to unlock the door. She then gently placed the key back in the same spot, and covered it with the mat. My uncle carved the key out of a piece of a dwarf star, she explained. It's so heavy that only a full-blooded Kryptonian can pick it up. It has to be put down very carefully. If I dropped it, it could create a new Grand Canyon up here. That's some security system, Gwen commented. Oh, there's a lot more inside, Jen said. I think he was just bored when he came up with this one. Or he was showing off. How? There's a reason he's called Superman. Jen stepped inside the Fortress of Solitude. Come on in, the heat's on. Despite all Gwen and Kevin had seen in their lives and what they'd been through just a few hours earlier, they couldn't help but look around in amazement. The fortress was beautiful, yet completely functional. Floating devices scanned them briefly, then merged with the walls as if they were liquid. This place was made with just a small sample of Kryptonian tech, Jen explained. Once, Krypton was among the most advanced civilizations in this universe. What happened? Gwen asked. Jen's brief good cheer vanished. The planet exploded. It happened about 60 years ago. I can count the number of pure-blooded Kryptonians left on one hand, and have fingers left over. And that includes the evil clone of my mom. Kevin blinked, then shook his head. Nope, not touching it with a 10-foot pole. Good idea, since she'd probably beat you to death with it. Jen stopped. Hold up, we've got one last security test. There were others. Kevin asked, what did you think those little machines were doing? If they recognized you as a threat, you'd have been teleported back into the cold. Further conversation halted when a silver, humanoid robot hovered over to them. It had a blank faceplate and a triangular crest on its chest that bore the number 13. Hello, Ultra Girl, the robot said in a pleasant voice. Master Kal-El is not in today. I apologize for the inconvenience. It's fine, 13. Jen smiled, then gestured to Gwen and Kevin. These are guests. It's a Tennyson thing. The robot nodded. I understand. The resources of the fortress are available to you, barring several items that require Master Kal-El's authorization. We only need one thing, Jen said. We need to see the Phantom Zone projector. We have reason to believe that something might have escaped. I find that highly unlikely, but if this is a Tennyson matter, I am programmed to assume that unlikely matters are more likely. The robot gestured to a hallway. Please, follow me. I always like Superbot 13, Jen commented as they followed the robot. He's nice. So, is this sort of thing just a regular day at the office for you? Kevin asked. Jen shrugged. Well, meeting alternate universe versions of people I've only heard stories about is a little weird, and I've never been part of a universe-saving team before. Still, I'm a Tennyson, and Dad taught us how to roll with these kinds of things. Right, I think we kind of glossed over how you're Ben's daughter. Gwen winced. I don't know how Julie's going to react when she finds out. Now it was Jen's turn to wince. Yeah, can we put that off for later? Today has been stressful enough, thanks. Tell me about it, Kevin muttered. Superbot 13 led them to a chamber guarded by two more robots, one marked with a 7, the other with a 9 and a force field over the entrance. One robot pressed its hand to a blank part of the wall, and the shield dropped. "I will wait here until you are finished," Superbot 13 said. "Please do not activate the Phantom Zone projector without authorization, or I will be forced to implement security protocols." "I got it, thanks." Jen patted the robot's chest and led the others inside. Resting on a pedestal was a boxy machine, with a handle on the sides and 2 tubes that intersected into a red-lensed emitter. On the other side was a viewing screen and several controls. "Wow, that thing looks dumb," Kevin said. "You look dumb," Jen shot back, and then lifted the machine up to her eyes. "Okay, let's see if I can find that ugly squid." She pressed several buttons and looked into the screen. Scanning, come on. This thing is supposed to find the inmates. Where is— oh, crap." Kevin sighed. "Let me guess he got out." "Oh, it gets worse. There's a freaking hole in the Phantom Zone. I think it's closed up now, but still, I don't even know how that's possible, and it looks like VERYYYY wasn't the only one to escape." "That sounds bad." Jen nodded and put the projector down. "It's about as bad as it gets, considering who was locked up. We need to get back to Paradox and find out what our next move is." "Not a problem." To their credit, the trio didn't jump too much when Paradox abruptly appeared behind them and snapped his fingers. There was a flash of light, and then they were gone. Fortunately, Midoriya and Julie were able to find a quiet place to give Tagada an abridged version of what was happening. Granted, they didn't know much more than the abridged version anyway, but Julie gave a few gory details about her world's fate, just to emphasize how important this mission was. "Wow." Tagada scratched his head and sat down. "This is huge. This is way bigger than anything I've ever done before." "Same," Midoriya and Julie both said, and shared a grim smile. "We still don't know why Paradox chose us for this," Julie said, and then grimaced. "It's not like I'm good at fighting. I barely started learning how to do the whole superhero thing before." "Well, before everything that happened, how come you guys came to pick me up?" Tagada asked. "Why didn't this Paradox get me himself?" "He didn't exactly know who else to get from our world," Midoriya said. "He knew it was someone who had great power contained inside. But that's all." Tagada nodded. "Oh, I get it. You mean one for all." He shrugged when Midoriya stared at him. "What? All of existence is at stake, right? No point in keeping it secret." Midoriya saw Julie's confusion. "We'll explain later. Right now, we need to get back to the others. And I should probably get my costume," Tagada added. "I'd rather not have to save the universe naked." "Not to worry, all," Paradox said as he appeared, which made Midoriya jump a good 5 feet into the air and land in Julie's arms. To their mutual surprise, she held him as if he weighed nothing. "You must be Professor Paradox," Tagada asked, and then bowed. "Hi, I'm Tagada Mirio." Paradox smiled. "Welcome to the team, Mr. Tagada. I'm afraid we're rather short on pleasantries, so you'll have to finish introductions on the way, assuming, of course, that you're actually joining us." Midoriya started. He realized that Tagada hadn't actually said if he was on board. "Of course I am." Tagada grinned confidently. "Saving people is all I've ever wanted to do, and what could be better than saving everyone? A good attitude." Paradox held out a UA-issued costume case. "I picked this up for you on the way. No sense trying to sneak around more than you already have." "Great, thanks." Tagada took the case in one hand and draped his free arm across Midoriya's shoulders. "So, where do we go now?" "You'll see in a moment." There was a flash of light, and when Tagada opened his eyes again, he was in an unfamiliar place, standing in front of an unfamiliar green plane, standing next to mostly unfamiliar people. He didn't let it show, but he was on the verge of an anxiety attack. This was something he had not prepared for and had never been trained for. He was almost jealous of Midoriya. He, at least, had some experience in traveling between universes. "Hey, Izuku, you said that Professor Paradox was getting 7 of us for this mission," he said, grasping at the first question he had. "But there's only 6 of us." Paradox smiled wanly, but someone else spoke from the shadows. "Actually, I've been here for the last few minutes. Try not to let the time travel confuse you, boy." An aging man stepped into view. He wore a sharp business suit, but his attempt to stand tall was ruined by the cane he clearly needed to support him. His head was completely bald, and his eyes were like cut glass, for all the emotion they showed. If Tagada hadn't seen him move, he would have thought the man was dead. "Hello, children," the man said, with the slightest hint of a sneer, as if their mere presence was insulting. "I suppose I'll be here to make sure none of you accidentally cause the end of life as we know it." Jen slowly stalked forward, her hands clenched into fists. "Lex Luthor, what the hell are you doing here?" Luthor smiled. "Why, didn't you hear me? I'm going to save the universe." Earthland. Natsu breathed a stream of fire that incinerated hordes of the nameless things that had attacked his home. He couldn't help but grin, even in the face of impossible odds. He loved a fight that got his blood burning. "Hey, Ben," he shouted. "This area's clear." "Thanks, Ben," as Diamond Head stormed past to slice another abomination with a crystal blade. "You missed one. I had to give you something to do, right?" Natsu's bravado faltered when he saw the sky fracture like glass. "So this is bad." Ben shrugged. "Honestly, I don't even know what this is. All we can do is keep fighting until someone comes up with an answer." Natsu grinned again. "Good enough for me. Hey, did you see any of the others? Lucy and Gray are holding down the fort with the rest of the guild." Ben smiled fondly. "And Urza is doing her thing." Natsu was confused until he saw Urza leap from one rooftop to another, a sword in each hand, cutting down the monsters with graceful ferocity. "Yeah, that sounds about right." Natsu paused when the sky started to completely dissolve. Where there had once been bright blue and white clouds, there was only nothing. "Ben, Natsu," Urza landed nearby, glancing nervously at the sky before heading to her boyfriend. "I have no idea what to do about that." Ben took her hand in his own. Universes are dying. Even as we speak," Paradox said sternly as he stepped between Jen and Luther. "I know it is ironic, coming from me, but we do not have time for your grudge, Jennifer." Grudge. Jen shoved Paradox out of the way and grew to nearly 40 feet tall. "Oh, this goes way beyond a grudge." She snatched Luther up in one enormous hand. "I swore that if you ever got out of prison again, I'd kill you, Lex." Despite his earlier attitude, Luther didn't even struggle and met Jen's eyes evenly. "And you have every right to. Even I have limits to what I would do to further my goals. I have rules, and I broke them." "You're damn right you did." There was a flash of green light, and then Humangouser grabbed Jen's arm. He had grown to equal her size, but she was still several times stronger. "Jen, let him go," he said. "I can see you hate him, but you're a hero. You're not supposed to be judge, jury, and executioner." Jen glared at him. "And you don't know what he did to me and my family." She shot a withering glare at Paradox. "And I'll bet he wouldn't bother to tell you what kind of monster he's asking us to work with, so I'll tell all of you. This guy," she dropped Luther unceremoniously on the ground. "This guy is the reason my brother died." Midoriya blinked. "Ken is dead." "He got better," Paradox said mildly. "Doesn't matter," Jen shouted. "He handed Ken over to Darkseid, the literal god of evil and tyranny. His soul was killed, and only because of time-traveling ghosts is he still here. And that's not the only thing he's done against my family. He spent years trying to kill my uncle. He used the Book of Fate to rewrite reality, and made a universe where my mom and dad were enemies. They killed each other. After we fixed things, they couldn't even look at each other for 6 months." Kevin shared a glance with Gwen. "Okay, I'm gonna need some context, but I think it's obvious this guy is pretty bad." As Jen returned to her normal size, she laughed. It wasn't a nice laugh. "Oh, it's way worse than bad. Lex Luthor was given 32 death sentences, not life sentences, death sentences. He was going to be executed tomorrow." She glared at Paradox again. "And you want us to work with him?" "I do," Paradox said calmly. "Your hatred of him is justified. But in this case, there is no one more suited to the role he must play if we are to survive what is happening." Luthor struggled to his feet and smoothed out his tie. Yes, it's obvious you didn't recruit me for my personality. That implies you have a personality with any redeeming qualities," Jen snapped. She turned back to Paradox. "You're positive we have to work with him?" Paradox nodded. "Believe me, Jennifer, I find him as deplorable as anyone, and had the crisis not been a factor, I would have gladly watched him meet his maker several times, as a matter of fact. But the fact remains that we do need him." Jen glanced at the rest of the team, but they just collectively shrugged. This decision was up to her. "Fine," she ground out, but then grabbed Luthor by the throat. "I'll play nice for now, but if I even think you're up to your old tricks, I won't hesitate. I'll crush your skull faster than you can blink, old man." Paradox smiled and clapped his hands together. "Well, now that that's settled, shall we be on our way?" Gwen glanced at Jen with concern, then shrugged. Where are we going? And how are we going to get there?" "I'm sure Paradox will just snap his fingers and we'll be there," Kevin half joked. "Actually, that is not the case," Paradox admitted. "The crisis is affecting my powers at an alarming rate. It is all I can do to remain anchored in this time stream. The best I can offer is to send you where you need to go, while I remain here to conserve my energies." He paused. "And it may seem longer to you than a brief flash. That is why I brought your ship with you. It will need to build up a bit of momentum before I can send it on its way. Don't worry, I'll be able to track your progress, and I'll know when you need to leave. As for where you're going, well, that part is easy." Paradox's smile was bitter. "Vilgax this version, at least, has an unhealthy hatred of Ben Tennyson. He wants to destroy any universe that has any connection to him. Todoroki raised his hand. Wait, if that's the case, why didn't he start with this universe? Paradox chuckled, and there was a hint of smugness to it. Because this universe's BEN10 is the one who beat him quite thoroughly, I might add. Vilgax would never admit it, but he is frightened of this universe, and will only come to destroy it once he is sure that Ben has no chance of stopping him again. I have another question. Midoriya resisted the urge to rub his head. He could feel a headache coming on. If the multiverse is infinite, shouldn't there be an infinite number of Bens? How can Vilgax destroy it all? He doesn't have to, Luther cut in. The multiverse is far more sensitive than you might think. Imagine the multiverse as a plate spinning on a stick. What Vilgax is doing is taking a small chunk out of the plate that unbalances it, and will make the whole thing fall apart. An accurate analogy, Paradox said. Your task is to find a way to undo the damage already done, to fill in the cracks in the plate, as it were. If you can do that, we may buy ourselves enough time to stop Vilgax himself. The teenagers of the team, which was all of them, barring Luther, shared a slightly confused look, but then nodded. I guess there's only one question left, Julie said. Where are we going? Vilgax didn't start destroying universes immediately after escaping the Phantom Zone, Paradox said. I'm sending you to the universe he and his followers first used as a refuge. You'll need to pick up his trail, retrace his steps, and see if he left anything behind. After that, well, let's see if you can get past this first step. Jen sighed. And on that optimistic note, let's get on the plane. Dibs on a window seat. Most of the team, including Luther, moved quickly into the Rust Bucket 3, but Midoriya lingered. Paradox noticed and walked over to him. Is something wrong? Midoriya shrugged. I'm not sure why I'm here. When Kevin and Julie, their universe was just destroyed, so that makes sense. Jen is really strong, and I guess we need someone as smart as that Luther person. And Mirio, he's the most heroic person I've ever met. He didn't even think about how dangerous this could be. You didn't exactly hesitate to help, Paradox pointed out. Only long enough for Ben to confirm that I was not an enemy. But you truly underestimate yourself, young man. You have the qualities necessary to lead this team to victory. Lead? Midoriya shook his head. And no, that's not me. Maybe I could lead a team of heroes someday, but I'm still learning. If anyone was going to be in charge, I'd say Jen or Mirio. Paradox held out a brown bag. Have a gumball, it'll calm your nerve. As for your suggestions, Jennifer is no leader. She thinks with her heart and is too emotionally invested to be objective. As for your friend, he has the same problem and is constantly struggling to come to terms that he must live up to All Might's legacy. It doesn't help that his mentor practically worships All Might, putting him on a bigger pedestal than he deserves. But you, Izuku, you fight with all your heart, yes, but you use your head just as much. You see a problem and use every tool at your disposal to solve it. Those qualities are what I prefer in a leader. It is why I put so much faith in the BEN10 of this universe. You, however, learned those lessons far earlier in life than he did. All you need to do is stop doubting yourself. Midoriya was about to say that he would try, until he remembered a conversation he'd had with Ben. I will. Good lad. Paradox raised the paper bag. Were you going to take a gumball? Sure. Midoriya took one of the candies. Thanks for believing in me, Professor. Paradox smiled. You're worth believing in. Kevin raised an eyebrow as Midoriya entered the plane. Did you actually take one of those gumballs? Midoriya froze mid-chew. Is that bad? Nobody takes those things. Kevin turned in his seat and adjusted the controls. Pretty sure they're from the 1950s. Midoriya immediately spat the candy into a nearby trash can. Okay, everyone better buckle up, Kevin called out. This might get bumpy. Question. Julie pointed to the window. This place is still locked up. How are we going to get moving? I'll take care of that, Jen said, then raised a hand to her ear. Hangar control, this is Ultra Girl. I need you to open hangar 2. Oh, and until further notice, no one else is allowed to use this hangar. If someone asks, point them at Superman. Thanks. Yes, the old standby of throwing your problems at Superman, Luther taunted. Well, unlike certain bald bastards I could name, I can rely on Superman, Jen retorted. And you didn't buckle up. I'd hate for you to get killed by whiplash before I get a chance to break your legs. Paradox was right, Midoriya thought. Jen is too emotional to be in charge. 7 champions assembled. None of them are strong enough to stop you. Of course they aren't. But until I destroy this wretched multiverse, we must abide by its rules. I will not target them directly. Not yet. What about indirectly? Of course. Let us see just what makes these fools the multiverse's champions. Send the drones. Midoriya had thought that his first trip in a spaceship would be smoother. Maybe it was because Paradox's powers were unstable. But the brief journey between universes felt like he was being picked up and shaken by an oversized toddler. When the Rust Bucket 3 came to a halt, he imagined his face was as green as his costume. Judging by the many groans he heard, he wasn't the only one. Okay, so that wasn't fun, Tagada said as he unsteadily got to his feet. Where are we? No idea, Kevin admitted. This thing doesn't exactly have GPS for the multiverse. Fortunately, I do, Luther said, and pulled what looked like a silver credit card from his pocket. One of several of my old inventions that Paradox recovered for me. With a flick of his wrist, Luther's device created a hologram of the Milky Way. It then expanded to show the entire universe, then even further to show multiple universes. The image shifted to one such universe, and then zoomed into what looked like Earth. Earth 901, Luther said, and then hummed thoughtfully. I never got a chance to conduct an in-depth scan of this one, but it has a breathable atmosphere. Jen frowned. When did you have time to make a map of the multiverse? I was involved with many projects when I was part of the Light, Luther said. Vandal Savage was always afraid of time travel, but he was tempted by the idea of going back to other Earths that were almost identical to ours, but where time hadn't caught up. What, did he want to relive his caveman days? Jen asked. Actually, I think he wanted to try and make Germany win World War II again. Apparently, he tried and failed to alter history. Yeah, the Justice League stopped him. As much as you may find it difficult to believe, but I'm glad they did, Luther said as he brushed an imaginary speck of dust from his suit. I was never fond of the Nazis. During this exchange, the other 5 just stared. So this sort of thing is normal for you guys, right? Tagada asked. Luther shrugged. I wouldn't call this normal, but it's become easier to accept. He gestured to the door. Now, shall we get going? Hey, hold on. Jen grabbed his arm. I don't trust you to go first, and I sure don't trust you to go last. You stay where we all can keep an eye on you. Luther rolled his eyes. If it makes you feel better, girl. Tagada volunteered to be the first out. If it was dangerous, he could simply use permeation to escape harm. Just give me a minute to change, he said, and hurried into the back with his costume case. Does he need a new wardrobe? Gwen asked. Julie sighed. Unless you want him to run around naked, yes. Dare I ask why? His costume is made out of a special nanotech material, Midoriya explained. It shifts to the same frequency he does. Regular clothes just fall off him. Kevin thought about it. So many jokes I could make. I'm pretty sure my friends have made all of them already. That won't stop me from trying. Okay, I'm back. Tagada called out. Midoriya raised an eyebrow when he noticed a change in his friend's costume. No visor. Tagada shrugged. I was so used to taking it off all the time, I just decided to go without it. Besides, you rock that look way better than I do. Oh, thanks. Tagada grinned and headed for the door rather than wait for it to open. He merely stuck his head through it. If I hadn't seen Big Chill and Ghostfreak, that would be so weird, Gwen commented. Okay, looks like we're good, Tagada reported. There's an old shack about 100 meters away, but nothing else of note. Mostly trees and bushes and a trail, nice place for a hike, actually. Jen nodded. All right, if Paradox sent us here, then that shack might be important. Still, maybe we shouldn't have the whole team go out there at once. Tagada slapped Midoriya on the back. Deku and I can check it out. Between my permeation and his aliens, we should be safe. Don't jinx it. Still, Jen nodded again. Okay, we'll be here for now, but I've got super hearing. If something goes wrong, I'll know. Hey, wait. Julie frowned at Midoriya. Why did he call you Deku? I'm putting the kanji together in my head, and that translates to useless. Midoriya winced. Can we explain it later? We might not have time right now. Sure. Julie sat back down and stared at her hand. It could have been Midoriya's imagination, but he thought he saw something writhing under her skin for a moment. Once the ramp lowered, and the pair went outside, Midoriya gently nudged Tagada. Hey, maybe we shouldn't use our hero names for this one. Tagada looked confused. Really? Why? I don't know. This whole thing saving the multiverse is really big. It feels kind of silly to use codenames at this point, you know. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Besides, most of the team is still getting to know us, and it might confuse them if we throw another couple of names into the mix. Good point. Tagada pointed. We're coming up on the shack. Want me to scout ahead? You can pass through walls, but people can still see you. Midoriya turned into Ghostfreak. I'll go invisible and look around. If it seems safe, I'll wave. You're going to stop being invisible so I can see you wave, right? Ghostfreak gave him a look. At least, Tagada assumed he did, because all Ghostfreak could actually manage was a single narrowed eye. Fortunately, there was no apparent danger, and Ghostfreak did wave him over. Tagada peered through a dusty window. There was an old, rotted chair, and a few cracked picture frames, but nothing of note aside from the gaping hole in the floor. I'd bet anything that's where we'll find answers, Ghostfreak said. Suckers bet, no takers here. Tagata cracked his knuckles. No sense actually using the door, right? The two simply walked through the wall of the shack like it wasn't even there and headed for the hole. Tagata frowned and stopped. There are stairs. Yeah, I can see that. Someone carved a perfect set of stairs under the floor of a filthy old shack, Tagata insisted. That is really weird. Not if they have something to hide. We're in the middle of the woods, and this is a cabin no one in their right mind would go into. Why bother putting a secret entrance under that? Ghostfreak shrugged. Paranoia. Come on, we won't find answers standing here. Tagata grumbled as Ghostfreak floated down the stairs. You're not actually standing, you know. The stairway went far underground. It was so dark that Tagata couldn't actually tell how long they walked for. It could have been 5 minutes or 5 hours. Finally, they entered a large cavern. Its walls were eerily smooth, as if it had been melted down and polished, rather than carved by any natural means. The floor was perfectly flat, save for a plinth in the center. Surrounding the plinth were dozens of strange symbols, and the dusty skeletons of at least 30 people. Normally, the sight of dead bodies would have disturbed both young heroes, but they were far too distracted by the gaping portal that hovered over the plinth. It was like a hole in space itself, leading to an empty void of nothingness. What is all this? Tagata asked, once he'd found his voice again. Midoriya turned back to normal and cautiously walked around the room. Do all these skeletons look like they're bowing? Tagata examined one of the bodies and nodded. Yeah, it looks like they're worshipping that portal thing. I found something. Midoriya knelt by another skeleton and pulled a dusty tome out from underneath it. He cracked it open and immediately flinched. What's wrong? I think this was all written in blood, Midoriya said shakily. Tagata glanced back at the symbols. They made his eyes hurt if he stared at them too long. But yeah, I think everything here was. Midoriya skimmed through the contents of the book and swallowed. It looks like these guys were a cult. They all had dreams about this place and this portal. They started worshipping it because they thought their god was coming through. The last entry talks about how they can hear his footsteps heralding his approach. Tagata fought hard not to shiver. That's pretty messed up. Lot of that going around. That's not Izuku, Tagata realized, and spun around, only for his vision to be filled with the business end of a gun. He took a step back and saw who was holding it. He was a man that looked to be in his early 30s, and probably hadn't shaved since yesterday. He and the man next to him, taller and with much longer hair, wore outfits that suggested they were used to the outdoors. The handguns they held, however, didn't suggest normal hunters. Hey, guys, maybe you can put down the guns, Tagata offered. The shorter man raised an eyebrow. I'm not taking advice from a kid that looked like he stepped right out of Comic-Con. Well, I doubt they're demons, Dean, the taller man said. They're standing in front of a portal to God knows where, Sam, Dean said. I'm not taking chances. Tagata glanced at Midoriya, who gave the smallest of nods. Tagata immediately used permeation and sank into the floor. Dean fired on reflex, but the bullet passed harmlessly through him, skipped off the floor, and into the portal. By the time Sam shifted his aim, Midoriya turned into Diamond Head, grabbed both men by the face, and shoved them against the far wall. Sorry, Diamond Head said, but I don't like it when people shoot at my friends. It wouldn't have worked on me, Tagata pointed out. It's the principle of the thing. Before the two could argue, there was a sound like a drum. It echoed throughout the cavern. And though Tagata could feel it in his bones, the cavern itself didn't shake. He and Diamond Head slowly turned towards the portal, where they saw a long, sinuous arm stretch through. It had too many joints and 6 fingers on the hand, with sickly gray skin that looked more dead than alive. That, Diamond Head said, releasing the 2 men and pointing at the arm. We're here to stop something like that. Dean and Sam didn't hesitate. Clearly, the abomination reached through the hole in space was more threatening than 2 teenage boys. They raised their guns and started firing, even before the creature finished pulling itself into reality. But though the bullets dug into flesh, they didn't do enough. The creature that emerged made Tagata think of a horribly mutated ghostfreak. Its arms were long, but it had no legs to speak of. Instead, it looked like a mangled torso that hovered in the air. Its head was vaguely human, but it had no lower jaw. Rather, it had a long, purple tongue that waved about like an antenna. Its small, beady eyes locked onto Tagata and Diamond Head, and it shrieked. Everyone else immediately clapped their hands over their ears or whatever Diamond Head had and almost fell to their knees from the horrible sound. Kill it, someone shouted. Tagata couldn't be sure it wasn't him, but he reacted anyway. He unleashed a web of dark tendrils. Blackwhip gripped the monstrosity's head and arms tight and didn't let go. The creature struggled, but Tagata upped 1 for all to 30% and found that he was much stronger than the nightmare in front of him. Sam and Dean reloaded their guns and resumed firing, Their bullets didn't do much until Diamond Head hurled a crystal javelin that tore open its chest. Its innards exposed, the creature was suddenly vulnerable to the bullets. More gray flesh was torn away, and it collapsed in a twitching heap. Okay, so, Sam pointed at the dead thing, even as it dissolved into a cloud of ash. What the hell was that? We're not sure, Tagada admitted, and picked up the book Midoriya had dropped. We think this might help explain a few things, and help us stop it, Midoriya added as he turned back to normal. This is why we're here. Dean ran a hand through his hair. Okay, Sammy, I think we might have stepped into something way weirder than demons. You don't know the half of it, Tagada muttered, ignoring for the moment that demons were apparently a thing in this universe. Izuku, we need to get back to the others and tell them what happened. Right? Midoriya was about to take a step back, but paused. Is it just me, or is that portal getting bigger? Sam reloaded his gun. Oh, that's never a good thing. Time to go, Dean said, already running for the stairs. Right now. He almost made it to the first step when a long tendril of flesh burst from the portal and impaled him through the chest. Dean's head rolled towards Sam. Blood poured from his mouth as he tried to speak, but he was dead before he could form the words. No, Sam screamed and fired at the tendril, but his bullets were even less effective. When he ran out of ammunition, he hurled the empty gun, the tendril whipped about, and Sam was crushed by Dean's body. It all happened in less than 10 seconds. We need to go, Midoriya said, clearly struggling not to vomit. We need to go right now. Tagada forced himself to look away from the mangled remains. Alright, so, you guys wanna listen to some music or something? Kevin asked, after a few minutes of awkward silence. Luther looked up from the map he was studying and raised an eyebrow. Somehow, I doubt you have anything classical in your playlist. I'd prefer to listen to that while I work, or else work in silence. Gwen frowned at her boyfriend. Hey, didn't you get those Beethoven tracks I sent you? Kevin didn't meet her gaze. I might have forgotten to actually download them. You mean you didn't even try? Jen elbowed Julie. He's so busted. Julie grinned. Oh, yeah. If I had money, I'd bet it all that he's sleeping in that chair tonight. The two girls laughed until Jen suddenly jumped to her feet. I know that reaction, Luther sighed. She just heard something. Gunshots, Jen said tersely, and screaming. Oh, that's never good. Kevin rose from his chair. Let's check it out, make sure the other two are okay. You and I will, Jen corrected. 1. Be ready to make a barrier around the ship, just in case. Julie, keep an eye on Lex. If you think he's doing something he shouldn't, punch him in the face. Julie narrowed her eyes. To everyone's surprise, black and green goop emerged from the skin of her right hand, wrapping around it and turning into an armored gauntlet. With pleasure, she said. Luther sighed again. Why must the young always react with violence? Because you're evil, Jen snapped as she and Kevin headed down the ramp. Julie shrugged. Actually, I just don't like bald guys, and I kinda always wanted to punch one. Outside the Rust Bucket 3, Jen cracked her knuckles and took a few steps toward the shack. Kevin placed his hand on the ground, absorbing the qualities of the stone path. In a moment, he looked like a stone statue of himself. Be ready for anything, Jen said. Always, Kevin said, as his hands morphed into rocky hammers. The two of them nearly attacked when a pair of blurs crashed through the wall of the shack, until they realized who it was. Tagada and Midoriya, who had turned into XLR8, were running for their lives. Run, Tagada shouted, waving his arms. Run, get us out of here, XLR8 added. Right now. Jen was about to ask what was going on, until a gray, fleshy tendril destroyed what was left of the shack, and reared up like a cobra. The tip bulged and split apart into a four-jawed maw. It screeched and lunged forward at just under the speed of sound. Jen drew back her fist to punch it, but XLR8 beat her to it, turning into Diamond Head and slicing the jaws off the monstrosity in one fluid motion. That won't stop it for long, Diamond Head panted. I've done that twice already. Jen nodded. Kevin, get on board and get the plane in the air. We'll hold it off until you're ready to go. We can't leave you here, Kevin protested. You're not, Jen assured him, as the tendril writhed and regenerated. Have Gwen teleport us back to you when you're ready. Oh, that makes sense. Kevin dropped his stone shell and ran back up the ramp. He'll need a minute, Jen said, and widened her stance. Diamond Head turned into Buzzshock. Then we hold the line. There was a flash of light, and Buzzshock was suddenly very different. Instead of a floating battery with tiny arms and legs, he now looked like 20 more slender batteries, all connected in a giant chain. 4 limbs sprouted from each battery, except for the front, and each limb ended in a scything blade of crackling yellow lightning. Ultimate Buzzshock's head had 2 enormous compound eyes, and mandibles made of even more lightning blades. So that's what Ultimate Buzzshock looks like, Jen commented. Weird. The abomination had finished regenerating and lunged at the heroes. Ultimate Buzzshock moved first. He shot forward in a straight line, his many legs outstretched. Then, each segment began rotating at a different speed and direction. When he passed by the tendril, he landed without issue, but the monster fell apart into hundreds of smoking pieces. Holy sh! Jen did a double take, then stared at Tagata. Did you know he could do that? No way, I didn't even know Buzzshock could go ultimate. I was saving it. Ultimate Buzzshock said, his voice a hissing crackle. Besides, there's more on the way. 3 more of the legless creatures Midoriya and Tagata had faced underground now emerged from the remains of the shack. One of them pointed at the heroes and shrieked. "Oh, that's just nasty," Jen said, wincing from the noise. "Take him down," Ultimate Buzzshock shouted and skittered towards the closest creature. Tagata charged up one for all to 30% and darted into range of another. He punched it in the chest and was rewarded with a sickly squelch as his fist drove clean through the other side. The monster was still alive and tried to grab him by the face, but Tagata merely used permeation. Not only did he avoid the strike, he also freed his arm. He spun around and kicked at what he thought was an elbow. There was a crack, and the arm snapped in half. The creature shrieked again, but Tagata covered its face with Black Whip, muffling the sound. "Not another word out of you," he shouted, and reeled the thing in for a final blow that crushed its skull. Jen caught the first blow from her opponent with one hand. She then heaved it over her shoulder and slammed it into the ground. She hopped onto its chest and drew back a fist. "You know, you caught me on a really bad Jen stumbled as the creature's other hand lashed across her back, leaving behind 3 jagged cuts. "Are you okay?" Tagata called out, already rushing to her aid. In response, Jen grabbed one of her earrings and tossed it onto the arm she'd pinned. It was instantly trapped, rooted to the ground by thick vines. She then grabbed the hand that had hurt her and crushed it. The monster's head followed suit once she drove her foot into its skull. "Does that answer your question?" Jen asked, and Tagata grinned. Ultimate Buzzshock dealt with his own opponent quickly and efficiently. His 20 different segments detached from each other, darting around the monster faster than it could react. In seconds, it was reduced to burnt chunks of meat, and the segments reattached. Midoriya turned back to normal, but just as he began jogging over to his friends, all 3 of them were blinded by a flash of pink light. When they could see again, they found themselves back aboard the Rust Bucket 3. Gwen groaned and sank into her seat, clutching her head. "Oh, teleporting still gives me a migraine. Kevin better get us out of here, or we're all gonna feel a lot worse," Jen said. "How's it going, Levin?" "We're taking off, don't have a cow," Kevin shouted back. Midoriya, Tagata and Jen hadn't strapped in, so when the ship abruptly accelerated, all 3 tumbled into the rear section. They crashed in an undignified pile. Unusually, it was Jen who let out a yelp of pain. "Get off me," she snapped. "I think I'm still bleeding here." Midoriya helped his cousin to her feet and inspected her back. Sure enough, the cuts were still there, but he could see them healing before his eyes. "How long will it take for you to heal?" he asked. "Not sure," Jen admitted. "That's the first time something's hurt me like that before. It wasn't magic. I know what that feels like, and it definitely wasn't kryptonite. Perhaps I can find some answers," Lothar said, and waved his cane to get their attention. "If I could have a sample of one of those creatures, I might be able to figure out what they are and how to defeat them." Tagata shrugged. "I don't know, we beat him pretty easily." Lothar sneered. "If those 4 things you fought were the extent of the threat, I wouldn't be here." It was obvious that none of them were Vilgax himself, so that means he has disposable forces. "We don't know what they are, where they come from, or how many Vilgax has under his control. If you think it's going to be easy just because you beat a few foot soldiers, you won't survive this mission." Tagata flinched, but noticed something on his glove. "You said you needed a sample, right?" Lothar saw the gray ooze on Tagata's glove and smirked. "Now all I need is a laboratory. I believe the watchtower has one." Midoriya saw Jen open her mouth to protest, but beat her to it. "Professor Paradox, if you're listening, I think we're ready to come back." "Welcome back," Paradox said as the team descended the ramp. "I assume your task was successful." "Well, we got this book," Tagata said, waving the dusty tome for emphasis. "Does that count?" Paradox smiled. "Indeed, it does. If you don't mind, I'll take it to an associate who can help decipher any useful clues that may help us." Jen raised an eyebrow. "Anyone I'd know." When Paradox didn't meet her eyes, she frowned. "Wait, oh, you jerk. You're the reason we haven't seen John in almost a month, aren't you?" Midoriya looked between Jen and Paradox. He was starting to get a headache trying to follow everything. "Who?" "John Constantine," Jen said offhandedly. "One of the most powerful sorcerers on the planet. He's an ass at the best of times, but he's useful, and we tolerate him because he's dating a family friend." Jennifer is understating Mr. Constantine's abilities, Paradox said. I can safely say that if he cannot find something useful within the pages of this book, then there is nothing useful to be found. I hope he does find something, Midoriya said, and grimaced. I watched 2 people die before we could get that book out of there. Paradox solemnly nodded. Unfortunately, there is little we can do to prevent casualties. Every minute that passes, entire universes die. The best we can do is stay the course and do all we can to reverse the damage Vilgax has done. Midoriya absorbed that. He had seen people badly hurt before he'd been badly hurt before, and though he'd heard about people dying in connection to something he was a part of, he had never seen someone die in front of him. With all that had happened immediately after Sam and Dean's deaths, he hadn't had time to process it. But now, he could feel his gorge rising. "Excuse me," he muttered, and managed to take a few steps before throwing up. A strong hand rested on his shoulder. "Let it out, freshman, get it out of your system." Midoriya flinched. Paradox had mentioned that he was supposed to be leading this team, and here he was, vomiting in front of the people he was told to lead. First time seeing someone die, right? Tagada kept his composure, barring a little paleness. "You mean you have?" "Yeah, last year." Tagada shuddered. "Sir Night-Eye brought me to a murder investigation. The police were supposed to have removed the body before I arrived. That's part of an agreement between heroes with interns and the police. Anyway, there was a mix-up, and I saw. Well, let's just say you held it in longer than I did." Midoriya noticed Gwen, Kevin and Julie giving him sympathetic looks, and remembered that they had seen their entire world die, including their friends and families. He felt pathetic. They were handling that kind of devastating loss better than he could handle the deaths of 2 strangers. Then again, they were probably only able to keep going because they had hoped that those losses could be undone. "Hey, can you guys keep an eye on Luther for a few minutes?" Jen asked, clearly pretending she hadn't seen and heard everything. Kevin scoffed. "You got somewhere else to be." Jen turned to show the healing cuts on her back, still visible through the tatters of her costume. "Yeah, I'm gonna get changed. I have a spare costume, but if we need to travel for a while, I should probably pick up some extra clothes. Actually, I could pick up some stuff for all of you, unless you want to wear the same stuff for who knows how long." "There's a washer and dryer on the rust bucket," Gwen said, and then shrugged. "But, yeah, some fresh clothes might be nice." "Cool. I'll be back in a bit." Jen waved and headed deeper into the watchtower. "I'll watch Luther," Kevin decided. "I could use something to do that isn't sitting in a cockpit." Luther rolled his eyes. "Ah, I see the delinquent is my babysitter. I suppose it's a good thing I've infiltrated the watchtower before, since I won't be able to rely on you to guide me to the labs." Kevin roughly shoved him forward. "You know, I'm starting to see why Jen hates you so much." Paradox sighed, but once Kevin and Luther were gone, he smiled again. "Ah, look at the time. Sorry, everyone, but I must be off for now. Do try to keep yourselves entertained until I find the next lead, would you?" The Time Walker vanished, leaving the 4 remaining teens alone. They stood awkwardly for a moment, until Midoriya coughed into his hand. "So, anyone seen any good movies lately? We were only able to test 3 of them. No matter, what we had merely hypothesized has become true. Your DNA improved the drones enough to wound the Kryptonian. If she is destroyed, their minuscule chances are reduced even further. What about the boy who bears the OMNITRIX? You have often said how he is our biggest threat. That child is not BEN10, but a pale shadow playing make-believe. Even if he was another BEN10, no one in the multiverse is strong enough to stop me, save one. That is why we will not fight him. We need only finish our work, and the death of reality will kill him for us, and the champions who stand in our way. As I said, none of them are BEN10. They are 7 miserable souls that are out of their depth. I only hope they provide some entertainment before they drown." Tokyo, Kendo Itsuka practically flew across the rooftops, one for all surging through her in response to her rage. There, right in front of her, was the man who had caused so much misery, not just for Japan, but for her as well. He had, by his own hand or through his followers, killed heroes, police, and anyone else who tried to stop him. Today, it ended. Today, Midoriya Izuku would be dragged into the light, either as a prisoner or a corpse. "Get back here," she shouted, and tried to snare the man known as Seraph with Black Whip. But again, his exoskeleton let him dodge just in time. But that was exactly what Kendo wanted him to do. Instead of catching Midoriya, Black Whip latched onto a flagpole, and she swung herself around to cut off his path. Her hands grew to massive size, and she pinned him to the roof of the building they stood on. "You're not going anywhere," Battle Fist growled. "But maybe you'll get a lighter sentence if you tell me what you've done." Seraph's helmet folded back, revealing the face that had somehow swayed millions across Japan to his cause. "Dear Itsuka, if I was responsible for this, do you really think I'd be running?" And before you claim it's because I made a mistake, well, I think you know by now that my mistakes are never to this extent. Why, they don't even measure up to yours. Tell me, what were All Might's final words to you again? Kendo saw red, but then felt a sharp pain in her right hand. The pain spread up her arm, and then through her entire body, and she fell in an agonized heap. She barely had the strength to glare at Midoriya, who held a bloody knife in one hand. I really must thank Pandora for this lovely neurotoxin, he said, and then glanced up at the sky, which was slowly cracking apart along with the rest of the world. I wonder if I'll be able to kill you before this phenomenon reaches us. Let's find out. Midoriya stared at his reflection, only occasionally looking away to vomit and then wash out his mouth. He'd tried to eat something earlier, but his stress was doing his stomach no favors and had barely managed to find the nearest bathroom on the watchtower in time. Why was this happening? Why did he have to be on this team? Everyone was either traumatized, out of their depth, or an outright supervillain. Aside from Lex Luthor, none of them were even old enough to rent a car. Midoriya didn't even have a driver's license yet. What business did he have saving the entire multiverse? This mission had barely begun, and he already felt like a failure. He couldn't stop thinking about Sam and Dean, and how he'd been unable to save them. That was all he wanted to do, to save people. What kind of hero couldn't save the innocent from monsters? He wanted to talk to someone about this. His mother, his friends, Ben. Someone had to have some good advice, right? Except, when he thought about it, what could they say? It wasn't like Ida, for example, knew how to fight an alien warlord from another universe bent on destroying all of creation. The thought of him posing that question to Ida and the resulting arm chops as he tried to even process all that almost made Midoriya break into hysterics. Instead, he emptied what little remained in his stomach into the sink. A knock on the bathroom door made him jump. Hey, Izuku, you good in there? Luthor says he's got something for us. Why, yeah, sure, Midoriya called out. Thanks, Mirio. After making sure he was presentable, he left the bathroom. His visor was in his pocket, and his hood was pulled back. Normally, he was proud of his costume, and wanted to look like a hero every time he wore it. But now, he didn't feel like anything but a failure. Man, I hope Luthor found something useful from that goo I gave him. Tagada commented as they walked. He seemed so relaxed, much to Midoriya's envy. It better be worth it. I spent almost an hour scrubbing my gloves. Maybe he found a weakness in those monsters, Midoriya offered. Maybe the universe will cut us a break and we'll find out they have a really stupid weakness, Tagada half joked. Like salt or wooden baseball bats. The universe is never that kind, Jen called out as they entered the hangar. At their looks of surprise, she tapped her ear. Super hearing, remember. Anyway, yeah, Baldy has some news. Luthor shot her a dirty look, and then pressed open what looked like a small pocket watch. It hovered in midair, and projected a hologram of the gray sludge Tagada had given him. I've been examining the sample of the creatures you fought on Earth 901. He said. Firstly, they are not natural. There are clear signs of genetic tampering. Someone created these things from different samples of DNA quite inelegantly, I might add. Vilgax, or someone working with him, only wanted these things to function enough to get the job done. Kevin snorted. I'm guessing that job is murder, murder, and more murder. You're forgetting all the destruction that accompanies that murder, but yes. Luthor sighed. I didn't recognize most of the DNA used, but I was able to identify one element. Ultra Girl, did you ever hear about the creature called Doomsday? Jen frowned. I think so. He was created to destroy Superman, right? He fought an evil version of him, came back, fought the real thing, and then got sent to the Phantom Zone. Luthor scoffed. Clearly, the Justice League didn't want to advertise just how dangerous that monster is. For those of you not in the know, he was created by Cadmus, a shadow cabinet of the US government dedicated to defending the world from the potential of superheroes going rogue. I admit that I helped them in an effort to further my own goals. Back to the point, before Cadmus was shut down, they used parts of Kryptonian DNA to create the ultimate life form. Doomsday is strong enough to destroy worlds, tough enough to survive against the most powerful attacks in deadliest environments, and has absolutely no mercy. His greatest strength is his ability to adapt. He will always come back to life, forever immune to whatever killed him. I sincerely doubt the Phantom Zone weakened him, nor did it help what passes for a mind in that beast. Julie swallowed. And those things that we saw were made from him. Not entirely, Luthor revealed. Creating Doomsday took years of trial and error, not to mention resources that Vilgax is probably more interested in destroying. These creatures are a shadow of a pale imitation, made with numbers in mind. If they had Doomsday's true power, Ultra Girl, you wouldn't have just been scratched, you would have been killed. Then why make them at all? Gwen asked. That's the interesting part. Luther started to pace. The sample I examined showed signs of aggressive cellular degeneration, caused by a form of radiation I've never seen before. The method Vilgax uses to travel between universes must be extremely hazardous. For ordinary humans, just being exposed to that energy for too long is lethal. Immediate symptoms would include spontaneous organ failure, seizures, and extreme vertigo. I was near a portal when it opened, Julie said quietly. It felt like I was being ripped apart. That must be why I was such a mess inside, and why Ship had to. Jen gently patted her shoulder when Julie trailed off. And these creatures use the Doomsday DNA to safely travel between universes. I wouldn't say safely, Luther admitted. As I said, the sample I examined was already suffering degradation. I imagine that they can last only until the universe they are attacking is destroyed. Maybe that's what we need to do, Tagata said. We find wherever these things are getting made, and we shut it down. That would at least buy some time, right? Luther shrugged. That's assuming Vilgax is foolish enough to limit his production facility to one location, and we can find it among infinite universes. It's better than nothing, Midoriya said quietly. If we can stop even some of them, we could save a lot of people. Gwen sighed. You're not wrong, Izuku, but we still need to find the place. Fortunately, Paradox said as he abruptly appeared, I believe we can help with that. Midoriya blinked at the sudden arrival, and then wrinkled his nose at the overwhelming smell of alcohol coming from the man standing next to Paradox. Hey, you lot, the blonde man greeted, his words slightly slurred and mixing with a thick British accent. He was tall, wearing a rumpled trench coat over an even more rumpled set of pants, dress shirt, and tie. He held a bottle in one hand, and the book the team had recovered in the other. If his bloodshot eyes and swaying were any indication, he probably hadn't done much reading. Oh God. Jen buried her face in her hands. John, you're drunk again. Nah, love, just tipsy. You've never seen me really drunk. Paradox shook his head. Everyone, meet John Constantine, last of the Laughing Magicians, and current master of the House of Mystery. Kevin raised an eyebrow. Laughing Magician? What, do you do birthdays for clowns? Constantine grinned, and tossed his empty bottle into the air. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, then reformed into a glowing dagger that sank all the way to the hilt into the floor. That was me knackered, he said. You don't want to know what I can do when I'm trying. His eyes roamed over the group until he saw Luther. Oi, Lex, what the hell are you doing air? Paradox. Mate, you never said anything about that asshole Bane part of the team. It was difficult enough to obtain your assistance, Paradox said, not sounding sorry in the slightest. If you had known about Luther, you would have said no, even with the multiverse at stake. Tagata asked. Paradox shook his head again. Jennifer isn't the only one who hates him that much. You're damn right. Constantine staggered towards Luther, but just as he drew back his fist, he slumped and walked away. Aw, hell, what do I care what you do, Lex? You're dead at the end of this shite either way. I'm well aware, Luther said calmly. Consider this my last attempt at redemption. Constantine laughed, but it was harsh and cruel. Oh, mate, you can try to redeem yourself all you want. It won't make up for the millions of lives you've ruined. Which is why I said attempt. Luther leaned against his cane and sighed. Paradox, why did you bring this fool here? Because he's the only sorcerer I know who could read the contents of that journal, understand it, and not go completely insane or be corrupted by its power. Constantine pulled another bottle out from under his coat. Hence the drinking. Help me keep my head. Jen rolled her eyes, but she seemed strangely fond of the man. Yeah, it probably doesn't hurt that you're already screwed up. Good point, love. Constantine took a swig, then handed the bottle to Paradox and started flipping through the book. Okay, I've only been able to scratch the surface of this thing. The journal entries are just a disguise, meant to hide the true message from those without any sort of mystic connection. Any one of you who read it probably dodged a bullet. Midoriya swallowed nervously. Anyway, that cult worshipped this Vilgax prick, but he also scared the piss out of them. They were afraid that their god might be too powerful, and sought to balance his might so that their world wouldn't be destroyed. It wasn't enough, Paradox said grimly. Earth 901 was wiped out 20 minutes ago, along with the rest of that universe. Constantine shrugged. Judging by what I've heard through the mystical grapevine about that universe, it was probably going to hell anyway. And I mean that literally. He tapped at one of the pages. Those of the cult with more than a spark of magic looked into the void a little too long. It killed them, but not before they found clues, hints of items that could limit Vilgax's powers, or maybe even kill him. And, because they wanted to be mysterious wankers, they put it in prophecy form. What does it say? Gwen asked. Constantine sighed. I hate reading prophecies. Here, let me show you. He waved his hand, and letters literally flowed off the pages and hovered in midair. Living crown of a broken king. Kept from all till calamity strikes. The first step to forge the ring. An emperor's mask conceals his lie, circled by puppets and foes. The second part with blood you'll buy. Time unbound is hidden well, guarded by the noble blind. Break the final piece from mortal shell. When the words faded, everyone was silent for a moment. Is that it? Kevin asked. Constantine scowled. It was written by madmen in a cave. I was just glad it wasn't a Sex Pistols song backwards or something. Jen frowned. So we're looking for a living crown, an emperor's mask, and time unbound, whatever that last one means. She turned to Luther. Any ideas? Why are you asking me? Magic isn't something I hold much knowledge of. You're the one who's always bragging about your 12th level intellect. Midoriya raised his hand. Well, going by the last line, it sounds like time unbound is a person, doesn't it? Julie nodded. That sounds right, but I don't know about anything about a living crown. What about the mask? Constantine sighed. You know, I remember hearing about some emperor in another dimension mucking about with magic he shouldn't. I could call in a few favors, maybe find out where this bloke is and if he's got a mask. Tagata grinned. Sounds to me like we've found at least one lead. That's assuming this prophecy holds any weight, Luther pointed out. For all we know, it remains the raving of lunatics. It's more than we had an hour ago, Midoriya said, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in hours. Indeed it is. Paradox closed his eyes and then smiled. Now that I have even a faint idea of what to look for, I believe I can find a universe that holds a living crown, while Mr. Constantine takes another team to get the mask. After that, we will all go to retrieve time unbound. Midoriya reviewed what Paradox just said and frowned. Do you not want all of us going out at once? Correct, because Mr. Tagata brought up an interesting point. If we are to keep Vilgax from doing irreparable harm while these items are being retrieved, his progress needs to be slowed. I will do everything in my power to locate where his forces are being created, and send the third team to sabotage their production. Tagata punched his open palm. Okay, so who goes where? Any ideas, Izuku? As soon as Paradox had said that they would be broken up into smaller teams, his mind had gone into overdrive. We'd need at least one heavy hitter per team, preferably to distract any potential enemies while the others go after the target. Professor, would you know who'd be best suited for each place? Paradox considered this for a moment. Jennifer, you and Kevin will retrieve the crown. This task will require stealth, speed, and some roguish behavior. Gwen and Mr. Tagata will find the mask. I would like Miss Yamamoto, Mr. Midoriya, and Luther to stay here until I can determine where they need to go. That wasn't what Midoriya wanted. This meant waiting, and that meant being alone with his downward spiraling thoughts. Also, he didn't like the idea of being on a team with Lex Luthor. He hadn't even had a conversation with the man. But if even half of what Jen mentioned in her earlier rant was true, he was possibly one of the most evil people he'd ever met. As if merely thinking about him was enough, Luthor stepped forward. If I'm to be part of a field operation, there are a few things I'll need. Paradox. I'm well aware, Paradox said archly. I'll have them ready before you leave. Constantine sighed. Right, I suppose I should get started on my end. Cheers, you lot. Jen waved to get his attention. You're heading back home, right? Tell Zatanna I said hi. Constantine's smile was a little more genuine. Sure thing, kid, but she should be back in the league in a few weeks. Just try to make sure she has a universe to work in, yeah. Once Constantine was gone, Jen noticed the others on her team looking at her with questioning eyes. Long story, short version, a family friend spent the last few years being possessed. She's free now and recovering. Midoriya couldn't help but smile. Even if he didn't have much context, it really helped to hear some good news. Hey, Izuku. Julie waved at him. If you don't mind, could you help me with something while we wait? Midoriya glanced at the others, but all he got were shrugs or indifference in Luthor's case. Sure. Great. Julie led him to the far side of the hangar, where a stack of supply crates shielded them from view. Midoriya wondered if Julie knew that Jen had X-ray vision and super hearing, making this privacy moot. But he decided not to say anything. So, what's up? Well, Mirio said that you're kind of a superhero fanboy. I was wondering if you could help me figure out my powers. Julie held out one arm. The skin rippled, and then black goop erupted from her pores, covering her arm up to the shoulder. Green circuitry appeared as the goop formed into armor around her limb. Any ideas? Midoriya had a notebook out before he knew what he was doing. Okay, let's talk about how you felt when that happened. Any drawbacks, like fatigue? Julie grinned. Oh, yeah, you were definitely the right person to talk to. It turned out that Constantine required several hours to undo several barriers stopping them from going to the universe that had the living crown, so Paradox sent Tagata and Gwen to retrieve the mask while they waited. That gave Midoriya and Julie plenty of time to go over what they knew of the latter's new abilities. Soon enough, Midoriya thought she had enough of a grasp over the basics that she should spar. In my world, the best way to test someone's powers is by training against someone else, he said. Why don't you try against one of my aliens? I can turn into something durable, and you can get a handle on actually trying to hit a target. Kevin, who had been watching them, chuckled. What? Your school encourages you to beat each other up. Can I go there? Jen grinned. Oh, it gets better. Apparently, his school has a whole fighting tournament, and it's on national TV. That's actually kinda cool. Kevin eyed Midoriya. How'd he do? He won for his year? It was really cool. Jen shrugged at her cousin apologetically. I wasn't in a good mood when I watched it, but when I think about it now, it was really cool. Midoriya blinked. Wait, you watched the sports festival? How? That was before I met you. Jen snapped her fingers. Oh, right. Ken and I were there to make sure you really deserve the watch. Did we forget to tell you? I think it got overshadowed when you kidnapped me. Yeah, good times. Julie was clearly confused and a little annoyed. I thought we were sparring. Alright, sorry. Midoriya hastily turned into swamp fire. Let's see how strong you are. Remember what we talked about, and try to hit me. Okay. Julie concentrated, and the same black goop covered her body like a wetsuit. A moment later, it expanded and shifted into form-fitting black plates and green circuitry, including a helmet. Only her face was exposed, but it was protected by a green visor. Let's see how this works. The first punch she threw barely left a dent in Swampfire's plant body, and he frowned. Okay, do you even know how to throw a punch? Julie looked embarrassed. I kinda thought I'd get super strength or something. You should still put some effort into it, Jen called out. Swampfire can take whatever you dish out. Julie nodded and put all her weight behind the next blow. There was a sickening squelch as she punched clean through him, only stopping when her elbow emerged out his back. Oh, geez. Are you okay? Swampfire looked down at her. Well, I don't feel pain, and I'll regenerate when you pull that out of me. Phrasing. Kevin shouted, and Jen fell over in a fit of giggles. Julie tore her arm free and glared at Kevin. Hey, Kevin, can you absorb some metal, please? Still amused at his own joke, Kevin humored her and placed his hand on the hangar floor. He'd barely had time to cover his body in metal when a beam of green energy slammed into him. Julie smirked as she lowered her arm, now encased in a cannon almost twice as wide as her torso. You are right, Izuku, she said cheerfully. All I have to do is think about the task I want accomplished, and my powers form the technology that best accomplishes that task. Kevin grumbled as he got to his feet. So the task you wanted to accomplish was to shoot me. Pretty much. He gave her a dirty look. I hope Gwen's having more fun than I am. Constantine wiped his hands. All right, kids, everyone off the bus. What bus? Tagada asked. We stepped into a circle and you spoke gibberish. Is he always like this? Constantine asked Gwen, who shrugged. Don't ask me, I just met him this morning. Constantine shrugged. Anyway, welcome to Earth 1055, specifically, a subdimension. It's a little weird and dangerous, so don't get yourselves killed while you go rob this Emperor guy. What? You're not coming with us? Gwen asked. Hey, you two are the multiverse's champions, not me. Constantine shrugged. Seriously, it's never a good idea to interfere with that kind of thing. It never ends well. The best I can do is help you figure out what you need and help you get there. Speaking of which, where are we? Tagada looked around and saw what looked like a village not too far away and a large castle looming in the distance. If we're here for an emperor's mask, shouldn't we have arrived closer? Lad, would you want to just pop into the enemy's stronghold without a plan? Constantine shook his head. First, you've got to find the guy, see what he's doing, and find the best place to rob him. Tagada grimaced. I can't believe you just told us to do that with a straight face. Constantine shrugged. What? The guy's a tyrant and a right arse. Just try not to get yourselves killed, all right. Before the teens could question him, Constantine vanished. Gwen sighed. Okay, I'm betting we'll stick out, so we shouldn't go straight through the town. We'll go around. It'll take us a little longer, but we won't cause a scene. Good idea. The two walked in silence for a few minutes until Tagada spoke up. Hey, what do you plan to do once this is all over? What? You mean other than go back to my normal life? Gwen tapped her cheek under her glowing eye. I've got to figure out how to get my face normal again. Kinda hard to get into college if I look like I'm radioactive. If it helps, you'd fit right in on my Earth, Tagada said. I mean, I know a guy with a bird's head and a girl who's invisible all the time. How do people not bump into her? She wears clothes. Oh, that makes sense. Gwen paused and peered at the town. Is it just me, or are none of those people human? Tagada followed her gaze and realized she was right. The inhabitants of the town wore clothes like medieval peasants, and some of them looked human, but even from a distance, Tagata could see that even the most human of them had pointed ears. Others had far too many or not enough limbs or eyes. Tagata and Gwen weren't as shocked as they could have been. The former had grown up in a world of quirks, while Gwen knew aliens far stranger, but this place wasn't what they were expecting. I think I saw a video game like this once, Tagata commented. Which one? Gwen asked. I don't remember, Tagata admitted. I've been kind of focused on becoming a hero. Between that, schoolwork, and trying to have a social life, I haven't had time to play video games in years. Speaking of time, let's pick up the pace. Gwen set off at a jog. Maybe we can sightsee after my universe gets put back together. Tagata bit his lip, then hurried after her. Every so often, he was reminded that Gwen, Kevin and Julie could only keep going because of the hope they had that their universe would be restored. If they lost that hope, well, Tagata had only been taught about dealing with people who had lost everything, and had no desire to actually experience it. You know, I really wish that Constantine guy had told us what this emperor looks like, he said after a few minutes of silence. All we know is that he's got a mask, but what if he's got a whole army of masked soldiers or something? Gwen shrugged. Find the most important looking person in the building and hope we get lucky. As plans go, that isn't the best I've heard. It's not like we had a long time to discuss it, Gwen said defensively. And we're on a timetable. Okay, that's a good point. But maybe we should stay hidden until we have an idea of what's between us and the target. Gwen thought about it. Yeah, good point. Honestly, I'm just used to Ben always making things up on the fly, or having an idea at the last second. Tagata smiled. My mentor has the power to see the future, so he always taught me to be as prepared as possible. Alright, that's kind of cool. Gwen glanced at him. So, I know about the ability to go through walls, but what else can you do? Super strength and speed, higher than average durability, and I can create these energy tendril things that latch onto stuff and won't let go. Tagata hesitated, then decided to keep going. Apparently, I'm going to get other powers, but I haven't awakened them yet. I was going to say that's weird, but then I remembered my life, and suddenly it's not as weird. The rest of the hike was silent, but the small amount of banter had made the trip more companionable. It gave Tagata time to process everything that had happened, which he really needed. After all, he had gone from training to stop street thugs with superpowers to literally saving the multiverse in less than a day, and that was more than a little jarring. He eventually decided to compartmentalize and take things one goal at a time so that he wasn't overwhelmed. The way he figured it, as long as they completed each task one at a time, they would win. Maybe that was why he saw Midoriya as the natural leader to this team, he realized. He was young and inexperienced compared to Tagata anyway, but he could wrap his brain around the big picture and then break it down into manageable pieces for himself and everyone on his side. He had displayed that before, during the mission against the 8 precepts, but that had been colored by his hatred of Chisaki. This time, there was no personal vendetta to get in the way. As he followed after Gwen, he suddenly worried that she, Kevin, and Julie might have that problem. Midoriya panted lightly as he turned back to normal. Wow, you're really getting good at this. Julie smiled as her armor withdrew under her skin. Thanks, it just feels, I don't know, natural. Probably because it is, Kevin called out. It was natural for Ship, and he's part of you now. Your brain is basically remembering what it now already knows. Julie grimaced. I'm getting a headache just thinking about it. Good, you deserve a headache after shooting me. The door to the hangar hissed open, admitting Jen and Luther. The former was holding several pizza boxes, while the latter was pressing holographic keys generated from a small silver device that floated in front of him. I brought lunch, Jen announced, and Lex hasn't done anything evil the whole time, which has got to be a record for him. Does that mean you'll start trusting me? Lex asked, not looking up from his work. Not a chance in hell. Jen put the pizza down and peered at Luther's work. Any progress? I believe so. Luther glanced up when he felt everyone staring. It's not as momentous as it seems. I've been running scans of as many universes as possible, trying to track down the source of the creatures Vilgax is making. In doing so, I've been able to map out how they're spreading. With every new piece of data, it's starting to look like they are coming from one location. The multiverse is vast, however, and it will take some time to narrow down the universe in question, not to mention the planet. Give me another day, 2 at most. Kevin blinked. It's only going to take you 2 days to calculate a specific place in the infinite multiverse. Now you see why he's so dangerous, Jen muttered. Speaking of the multiverse, Paradox said as he appeared, which made everyone twitch in surprise. I have good news. I've located the living crown the prophecy spoke of. It's now time for Jennifer and Kevin to depart. Kevin looked mournfully at his uneaten pizza. That's, suck it up, convict. Jen smiled at Midoriya. Try to keep an eye on Lex, okay? If he does anything suspicious, don't be afraid to break his legs. Midoriya almost protested until he remembered that he'd done much worse to Chisaki. Sure thing. Good luck, and don't take any unnecessary risks. The entire multiverse is at stake, Jen reminded him. Every risk is necessary, right? Midoriya smiled weakly. Don't die. You need to work on your pep talks. Still, Jen gave him a hug before turning to Paradox. Let's get this over with. After the three were gone, Midoriya shared a look with Julie. I guess training is over. Yeah. Julie sat down, but kept Luther in her line of sight the entire time. Now we wait for our turn. So, you're seeing this, right? Tagada wanted to keep walking, but he couldn't. He was too busy staring and seeing, still working on believing. This isn't just a big island, Gwen said slowly, as if trying to understand it herself. It's a giant skeleton. After cresting a hill, the pair had seen what looked like massive, curved stones rising from the ground. Further in the distance, they could see an enormous horned skull. Tagada tried to figure out how big a creature like that had been in life, but gave up when he realized that it would be miles high. I have to know, Tagada said. Did this thing die on top of the island, and then it adapted around the body over thousands of years, or did it die first, and the island rose up around it? I don't know, Gwen admitted. And if we weren't in a hurry, I'd love to find out. Tagada laughed. Yeah, maybe we can come back and explore after we save the multiverse. Sounds like a fun vacation. Gwen focused on the castle, now less than half a mile away, and then dropped to the ground. Get down. Tagada was half a second behind her, and only after he was in cover did he follow Gwen's gaze. She had spotted a column of people, with gray uniforms and white cloaks. They wore vaguely bird-shaped masks and carried spears. It didn't take a genius to figure out that they were soldiers. They're headed for the castle, Gwen observed. Let's follow them and see if they can find us an entrance for us. Tagada grabbed her arm. Wait, you can tell they're going through the front gate. That's not gonna work for us. Do you have a better idea? Actually, I think I do. Tagada pointed to the top of the castle walls. The guards are patrolling, but there's a gap. If we time it right, we could pass through the patrols without a problem. Huh? Gwen blinked. That's pretty smart. You weren't kidding about learning to be observant. I try. Tagada carefully made his way down the hill. Come on, we've still got a hike left to go. Sticking to the outskirts of the forest, they made their way to the castle without being detected. They still didn't know if the soldiers were good guys or not, but they weren't going to take any chances, especially since their mission was to rob the Emperor. Okay, we're here, Gwen said. I can make a platform to carry us up. Tagada shook his head. Unless you can make your powers not glow, I think we need something a little less conspicuous. Give me a second, I need to get the timing right. Gwen reluctantly nodded, and Tagada used permeation to sink into the ground. He counted in his head, calculating just how long he had to sink before he built up enough momentum. After 11 seconds, he deactivated his quirk. Just as planned, he was catapulted straight up at considerable velocity. He managed to snag the edge of the crenellations and pulled himself over, and then threw Black Whip down to Gwen, latching onto her and reeling her up. How was that less conspicuous? She asked as she steadied herself. It wasn't glowing pink. Okay, point taken. Hey. Tagada and Gwen whirled and saw one of the soldiers, who had just rounded the corner. Stop right there. Tagada moved on reflex. He channeled one for all to cross the distance in an instant and knocked the guard out with a quick chop to the neck. As soon as the soldier hit the ground, Tagada frantically looked around, but didn't see any other guards. He must have mistimed one of the patrols, but not by too much. We need to get going, Gwen said, after running to catch up with his near teleport level dash. We'll have problems if we have to fight our way through the whole castle. Yeah. Tagada spotted some stairs and headed towards them. This way. They stuck to the shadows as they entered the interior of the castle. It was filled with gold and marble, and portraits of a figure with a golden, beaked mask and a white cloak. Judging by the way the paintings were held in clear esteem, Tagada figured that was the Emperor. That, or all the previous emperors all wore the same outfit. Either way, they now knew what the mask looked like. This place is pretty empty, Gwen noticed. I figured there'd be government officials, courtiers, people like that. Maybe today's their day off. Tagada shrugged. Or maybe the Emperor makes all the decisions. He could be a dictator. The way those paintings showed him raising a golden fist didn't give off a warm and fuzzy vibe. No, really. Despite her sarcasm, Gwen was smiling. It gave Tagada hope that he was keeping her from completely falling to whatever her powers were doing to her. I think we're going to have to take a prisoner, Tagada said, after a few minutes of fruitless searching. We can interrogate them and find out where the Emperor is. That's assuming we can get them to talk, Gwen countered, but sighed. But, yeah, it's a better option than just wandering around. Okay, so we'll jump the first person we see. If they don't know where the Emperor is, we'll make them tell us who does. To reduce risk, they searched for someone alone, which meant they avoided patrols of multiple soldiers. Eventually, they found a guard standing outside a door, even with a mask covering his face. He looked bored out of his mind. Gwen grabbed his head with a whip of mana and dragged him over to them. Tagada ripped the spear out of his hands and shoved him against a wall. Here's how this is gonna work, Tagada said, channeling his inner Night Eye to sound as intimidating as possible. You're gonna answer my questions, and if you do, I won't break your ribs. You shout, I break your ribs. You try to escape. I get it, the guard said quietly. You'll break my ribs. Why just my ribs? Gwen leaned in close. Tagada couldn't tell if she was intentionally making her eye glow brighter, but it was certainly ominous. Because if we didn't need you to talk, we'd break your jaw. Now, tell us where the Emperor is. I have no idea. The guard looked to his right, then his left, but there was no one around to help him. Look, I'm just a coven scout. No one tells me anything. Steve's barely good enough to work here. Tagada wanted to sigh. They had a basic grunt who didn't know anything. Then tell us who would know where the Emperor is. The Golden Guard, shorter than me, wears a golden mask, has a staff with a red jewel on the top. He's the top enforcer these days, and he gets his orders directly from Emperor Below's. Okay, so where is he? The guard, Steve, moved one finger to point at the door he'd been guarding. That way. He's probably doing research for Below's next assignment. I believe him, Gwen said. Yeah, so do I. Tagada drew back his fist. Sorry, buddy, but I have to knock you out now. Steve sighed. Yeah, I figured. This has not been Steve's day. A quick punch to the head knocked Steve unconscious. Tagada only took enough time to put the guy in a more comfortable position on the floor, and then joined Gwen by the door. So, any idea how we're going to get this Golden Guard to talk? Tagada asked. He's probably too loyal or smart to scare him into talking. Actually, I think I have a plan. Gwen's hands were surrounded by mana. Follow my lead. The Golden Guard's mask hid his surprise, but from the way he moved when Gwen shattered the door, he wasn't expecting company. He swept up his staff and pointed it at them, its red gem crackling with energy. Who are you two? He demanded, and it didn't escape their notice that he sounded significantly younger than them. What are you doing here? Take him down, Gwen ordered, and charged. Don't let him reach Below's. As soon as the words left her mouth, Tagada understood Gwen's plan. If the Golden Guard thought their objective was to keep him away from the Emperor, he would do everything in his power to do the opposite, and they could follow him. Assuming it worked, of course. Just before Gwen reached him, the Golden Guard vanished in a flash of red light. When he reappeared, he was hovering above them, nonchalantly laying along his staff. Nice try, girl, he taunted. But you'll have to do better than you were saying. Tagada interrupted, suddenly in the Golden Guard's personal space, his body crackling with golden energy. The Golden Guard yelped and teleported again before Tagada could kick him. Actually, Tagada could have hit him before he vanished, but he couldn't risk knocking him out and losing their best lead. What he could do, however, was keep him focused on retreating, and not give him time to counterattack. Gwen had the same plan, and was hurling bolts of mana at the Golden Guard whenever he stopped moving. With two skilled opponents not giving him space to breathe, much less fight back, the Golden Guard took the only route left to him, and ran. He teleported to the doorway, and then flew down the hall, riding his staff like the Wicked Witch. Quick, we can't lose him. Tagada sprinted after him, but not before taking a tendril of mana from Gwen, who was hovering on a pink platform, and dragging her behind him like a kite. The Golden Guard led them on a wild chase. When he thought they were getting too close, he would teleport to widen the distance between them. After seeing him do this a few times, Tagada realized that he could only teleport to a location he could see. That meant they would only lose sight of him if they got really unlucky. A few times, groups of soldiers would try to stop them, but Tagada easily passed by with permeation, and Gwen would toss bolts of mana at them to keep them from trying to catch up. After a few intense minutes of chasing, the Golden Guard led them to an imposing doorway. He practically collapsed off his staff and staggered through. Emperor Below's, he shouted. We have intruders, they're trying to. Even Gwen, with her emotions muted as they were, winced when Tagada punched the Golden Guard in the face. His mask shattered, revealing a young blonde boy with scars and pointed ears. He managed a wheeze, and then slumped to the ground, completely unconscious. That was kinda brutal, Gwen said. He'll be fine, Tagada assured her. He'll need some ice, but he'll be fine. Oh, that's good, a low, almost soothing voice said, and the door slammed shut, locking them in. I put a great deal of work into my Golden Guard, and I would hate to have to replace him so early on. Tagada folded his arms over his chest, the picture of calm nonchalance. Emperor Below's, I presume. Indeed, Below's was tall, his body completely hidden by white robes, golden gauntlets, and a golden, beaked mask with what looked like antlers. And might I say, I've never seen a human in a costume quite like that. It looks rather uncomfortable. No, it's designed not to pinch. First thing I asked when they made it for me. Below's shifted slightly in Gwen's direction. I'm not sure what to make of you, child, but you look like you're falling apart. Gwen cracked her knuckles. Looks can be deceiving. Oh, I know that better than anyone. Below's clasped his hands behind his back. Now, what is so important that you had to chase my poor golden guard throughout my castle? With barely a glance shared between them, Gwen and Tagada split apart, slowly moving to each of Below's sides. We're not here to cause trouble, Tagada said, holding out hope that the situation could be resolved without further violence. But things are really crazy right now, and the only way we can save a lot of people is with that mask of yours. So, Gwen held out a hand. We're gonna have to borrow that. Below's didn't respond for several long seconds, and then held his hands out. Gwen and Tagada tensed when they saw him holding a staff similar to the Golden Guard's. I'm afraid I have to decline, Below's said. Tagada felt the ground shudder beneath him, and instinctively activated permeation. That prevented him from getting grabbed by a fleshy arm that grew out of the floor. He darted back, only to get his legs swept out from under him by another arm that attacked from behind. Gwen hurled a bolt of mana at Below's, who casually batted it aside with his staff. Try again, girl. Go high, Tagada shouted. Gwen leaped, but another arm snagged her ankle and slammed her into the floor. She spat out blood and rolled to avoid a blast of red energy from Below's staff. He tried to fire again, but Tagada grabbed his arm and threw off his aim. Below's gestured, and part of the stone floor warped into a spike and headed right for Tagada's face. The only reason he wasn't killed was because he used permeation on his head. But the surprise was enough to make him loosen his grip, and Below's slipped free. Tagada and Gwen retreated for a moment, if only to give themselves time to breathe. Below's merely stood there, likely wondering what their next move would be. Something's wrong with this guy, Tagada whispered. When I grabbed his arm, it didn't feel human. Then we take him down before he tries to surprise us, Gwen said quietly. You go low, I'll go high. Tagada nodded. He leaned forward and used permeation again, vanishing into the floor. With one for all boosting both his body and his first quirk, he wasn't so much ejected from the ground as he was launched out at escape velocity. He passed easily through the flesh arms that Below summoned, and smashed his fist into the Emperor's gut. He would have gone for the head. It was the fastest way to knock someone out, in his opinion, but he couldn't risk destroying Below's mask. Below stumbled back and Tagada was surprised he was still standing after taking a 20% hit, but before he could recover, Gwen flew over him and bombarded him with mana. She then tied his arms to his sides with a pink rope of energy and jumped off the mana platform she'd been riding. Tagada was positive she'd landed on Below's on purpose. Let's try this again, Gwen all but snarled, and give me that mask. Rather than wait for his reply, Gwen ripped the mask off Below's head, revealing a very human-looking face, not counting the pointed ears and green mark that nearly bisected pale skin. Oh, very well, Below said, and rolled his eyes. You've beaten me and claimed your prize. I have other masks, you know, that one just happens to be my favorite. Whatever. Gwen handed the mask over to Tagada. She then paused, and spun around to punch Below squarely across the jaw. Whoa. Tagada grabbed her arm before she attacked again. What was that for? He's beaten, we don't have to keep hitting him. Gwen pulled her arm closer and dragged Tagada to her with surprising strength. I'm having a bad day, she hissed. I have lost too much to be nice right now, and if I think you're going to stop me, I will crush you like a grape. Understood. Tagada nodded warily, and Gwen stalked off, still lying on the ground, Below's side. You can't reason with crazy, he said. Tagada suddenly had no compunction about kicking the man while he was down, and then hurried after Gwen. Their mission was over, and now they had more important matters to attend to. I've found it, Luther declared suddenly, and Midoriya thought the man almost sounded excited. What you find? Julie asked, as the cannon on her arm morphed into something with too many barrels, and then vanished under her skin. The secret to reversing hair loss. Luther ignored her. I believe I've calculated where Vilgax is creating his army. It turns out he really is arrogant enough to put all his eggs into one basket, because all my scans indicate that they're being made on one planet, in one universe. Midoriya jumped to his feet. Where is it? Earth 989. Luther looked down at the small device that projected his holograms. Hyper-industrialized, but the pollutants wiped out all life on the planet so quickly that the humans there never realized what was killing them. If you want to create an army of monsters, this would be a good place to go. You're quite right, Paradox said as he stepped out of the shadows. And the timing couldn't be better. At this moment, the vast majority of Vilgax's army is destroying other universes, and the next batch hasn't been created yet. This is the perfect opportunity for a small team to infiltrate the factory and cause serious damage or perhaps even destroy it entirely. Then Julie and I can go, Midoriya said, but Paradox shook his head. Actually, you should include Mr. Luther as well. To be frank, the technologies you may encounter are beyond what either you or Ms. Yamamoto can understand. Luther may find a technical solution to this problem that doesn't involve simply smashing everything. But Midoriya glanced at the old man. Can you even fight? Luther smirked and snapped his fingers. A nearby box opened up, and pieces of machinery flew out. They assembled around Luther's body, until he was surrounded by a hulking exoskeleton. The outer plates were green, while the thinner sections were purple. The only part of him that was exposed was his head, but it was somewhat protected by a thick collar and hood. I think I can manage, he said. Despite knowing that Luther was a terrible person, and Julie had little experience, Midoriya grinned. So, what are we waiting for? So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 15. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author The Incredible Muffin on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.